My parents looked me dead in the eye and said, "Your sister's family always comes first, you are always last." My sister smirked as she sipped the $300 wine I had just bought. I simply adjusted my blazer and answered, "Good to know." Then I pulled out my phone and quietly separated my money from their lives. 10 minutes later, when the lights went out and their credit cards declined, they realized that being last meant I was the one holding the foundation together. Before I tell you how I legally evicted my own parents, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the family bank but treated like the family burden. My name is Sophia, and at 32 years old, I am a forensic auditor for Fortune 500 companies. My job is to find where the money is hiding and who is stealing it. I am ruthless, efficient, and highly paid. But to my family in Chicago, I am just Sophia, the single one. Sophia, the difficult one, and most importantly, Sophia, the ATM. For 10 years, I have paid their mortgage, their phone bills, and their car insurance. I thought buying their love would finally make me a daughter worth keeping. I was wrong. This Thanksgiving was supposed to be different. I had just closed a massive deal in Manhattan and flew home early hoping to surprise them. I was wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my father's car, carrying a bottle of vintage Cabernet Sauvignon that I had been saving for a special occasion. I walked into my parents' house expecting the smell of cornbread and greens and maybe a hug. Instead, I walked into a shrine for my sister Keisha and her husband Brad. Keisha is 29, beautiful, and completely useless. She calls herself a lifestyle influencer, but her only real influence is draining my parents' bank account. And then there is Brad, my brother-in-law. He is white mediocre and currently unemployed, but he calls himself a tech visionary. My parents worship him. They think because he is white, he is going to save them. They do not realize he is drowning in debt, and I am the one keeping the water out of the boat. I stepped into the dining room and the air shifted. My mother Linda looked up from the table. She did not smile. She did not say hello. She frowned at my shoes. "You are late, Sophia," she snapped. "We already started the prayer. Brad is hungry, and we could not wait for you to finish playing businesswoman." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "I am sorry, Mom, my flight was delayed. I brought this." I held out the bottle of wine. "It is a 2015 vintage. I thought we could toast to family." My mother snatched the bottle from my hand before I could even set it down. "Oh, good," she said. "Brad has been so stressed with his startup, he needs to relax." She turned and poured a massive glass for Brad and then filled Keisha's glass to the brim. She did not pour one for me. She did not pour one for my father. She put the bottle down in front of Brad like an offering to a god. "Thanks, Sophia," Brad said without looking at me. He took a sip and grimaced. "A bit dry, isn't it? I prefer something sweeter. But it will do." My blood began to boil, but I kept my face neutral. I looked around the table. There were 6 chairs. My parents, Keisha and Brad, my Aunt Sarah, and a spot for the pastor who was coming later. There was no chair for me. "Where do you want me to sit, Mom?" I asked. My father Marcus didn't even look up from his turkey. "Grab the folding chair from the garage, Sophia. Squeeze in at the corner. We did not think you were coming, so we gave your seat to Brad's vision board collection. He needs the space to think." I walked to the freezing garage in my Italian heels and dragged a dusty plastic chair back into the dining room. I squeezed it between the wall and the table leg. I was literally in the corner. The auditor in me noted the irony. I paid the mortgage on this house, but I did not have a seat at the table. So Sophia Keisha said, picking at her food, "We have big news. Brad and I are upgrading. We are getting a Range Rover." "That is nice," I said, trying to be polite. "Can you afford that right now? I know Brad is still in the seed round for his app." Keisha rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, stop being such a hater. You are always so negative. That is why you are single. We have to project success to attract success. The Range Rover is an investment in our brand." My father cleared his throat. He put down his fork and looked at me. "That brings us to why we are glad you are here, Sophia. The dealership needs a down payment, $15,000. We need you to write the check today so they can pick it up on Black Friday. I stopped eating. I looked at my father, then at my mother, then at Brad, who was smirking while swirling my $300 wine. You want me to give you $15,000 for a car I will never drive, while I am sitting on a plastic chair in the corner, I asked, my voice calm. It is not a gift, it is an investment, my mother said sharply. Brad is going to be a billionaire. He will pay you back double, probably triple. Stop being so stingy. You make all that money sitting in an office while your sister is out there trying to build a family. I put my fork down. No, I said. The room went silent. The only sound was the clock ticking on the wall. A clock I bought them 3 Christmases ago. Excuse me, my father said, his voice low and dangerous. I said no. Dad, I am not paying for a Range Rover. I paid for the roof replacement last year. I pay the cell phone bill for everyone at this table, including Brad. I pay the car insurance. I am done. Brad laughed, a dry, condescending sound. Wow. I told you guys she would be like this. This is that toxic corporate mindset. No empathy, no community. This is why I prefer the startup world. We help each other. You are unemployed, Brad, I said, cutting him off. You are 32 years old, and you are asking your wife's sister for money to buy a luxury car. That is not a startup. That is begging. My mother slammed her hand on the table. Enough, Sophia. Do not speak to him like that. He is a guest, and he is family. I stood up. My legs were shaking, but my hands were steady. I am family too, Mom. I am your daughter. My father stood up too, towering over me. He pointed a finger in my face. You listen to me. Keisha is married. She is building a legacy. She has a husband to support. Her family comes first. You are single. You have nobody. Your money is just sitting there doing nothing. You are selfish, Sophia. In this house, the family with the future comes first. You are always last. The words hung in the air. You are always last. It wasn't just anger in his voice. It was disdain. He truly believed that because I chose a career over a man like Brad, I was less valuable. He believed my purpose was to fuel their delusions. I looked at Keisha. She was smiling a cruel little smile like she had won a prize. I looked at Brad, who was draining the last of the wine from his glass. I looked at my mother, who was nodding in agreement with my father. Something inside me snapped, but it wasn't a loud snap. It was the quiet click of a vault door closing. The part of me that wanted their approval finally died, and in its place the cold, calculating auditor took over. Good to know, I said. My father looked confused by my calmness. What did you say? I said good to know, I repeated. I reached over and picked up the wine bottle. There was still about a quarter left. I poured it slowly, deliberately, into the potted fern next to my father's head. The dark red liquid splashed onto the leaves and soaked into the carpet. Sophia, what the hell are you doing? My mother shrieked. I am just watering the plants, Mom, I said. Since I am last, I figured I should clean up. I pulled out my phone. Under the table, I had already opened my family plan provider app. I was the account holder. Everyone else was just a line item. I tapped the screen. Select all lines: Keisha, Mom, Dad, Brad, option, suspend service, reason, non-payment, confirm. I watched the signal bars on Keisha's phone, which was sitting on the table next to her plate, turn from LTE to no service. I put my phone in my pocket. I grabbed my purse. Where do you think you are going? My father shouted. We are not done discussing the check. Oh, we are done, Dad, I said, walking to the door. You said Keisha's family comes first, so let Brad buy the car, let Brad pay the mortgage, let Brad pay for the phone bill. I opened the front door. The cold Chicago wind hit my face and it felt like freedom. By the way, I said, turning back one last time, I hope Brad has a data plan because I just canceled the family bundle, including the internet. I slammed the door before they could respond. I walked to my rental car sitting in the driveway. Through the window, I saw Keisha picking up her phone, tapping the screen frantically. I saw my father shouting at my mother. I saw Brad looking at his phone in panic. I started the engine. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank app. A request for $15,000 from Keisha via Zelle. I declined it. Then I blocked her number. I drove away, leaving them in the dark. Literally. Because what they didn't know was that the electric bill was in my name too. And I had scheduled a disconnect for tomorrow morning. This was just the beginning. They wanted a war. They had no idea they just declared it on the person who owned their battlefield. The next morning, silence was not golden at my parents' house. It was terrifying. I was not there to see it, but I knew exactly what happened at 7 a.m. when the alarm clocks went off. For the first time in 10 years, the router in the hallway was blinking a furious, angry red. The smart TV in the living room was a black mirror that refused to connect to Netflix. And most devastating of all, Keisha's phone was nothing more than an expensive paperweight. I woke up in my own apartment on the 45th floor overlooking the Chicago River. It was quiet. My phone usually buzzed with at least 3 demands by this hour. Mom needing money for a copay, Dad needing me to troubleshoot the printer remotely, Keisha sending links to shoes she wanted. Today there was nothing. Just the soft hum of my espresso machine and the morning sun hitting my hardwood floors. I dressed in my armor. A charcoal pencil skirt, a silk blouse and a blazer sharp enough to cut glass. I did not look like the girl sitting on a plastic chair in the garage. I looked like Sophia Sterling, the woman who hunted financial predators for a living. I arrived at my office at 8:30. My firm occupied the top 3 floors of a steel skyscraper in the Loop. The air here smelled of expensive coffee and ambition. This was my kingdom. Here I was not the black sheep. I was the wolf. My assistant Elena looked up as I walked in. She was a sharp young woman who worshipped the ground I walked on because I actually mentored her, unlike my own family, who only drained me. "Good morning, Ms. Sterling," Elena said, handing me a file. "You have a full schedule. The CEO of the logistics company is coming in at 10. We found the discrepancies in his offshore accounts." "Excellent," I said, taking the file. "Prepare the conference room. And Elena, screen all my calls today, even the personal ones, especially the personal ones." Elena nodded. She knew the drill. She had heard my mother screaming over the speakerphone enough times to know that my family was a liability. I sat at my desk and opened the file. It was a forensic audit of a manufacturing firm that was bleeding cash. As I traced the hidden wire transfers and shell companies, I felt a sense of calm. Numbers made sense. Numbers did not lie. Numbers did not tell you that you were unlovable because you refused to buy your sister a luxury car. Around 10:15, the intercom on my desk buzzed. Ms. Sterling, Elena's voice was tight. "I have a woman on line 1. She says she is your sister. She is quite agitated. She is demanding to be put through." I leaned back in my leather chair. I could imagine Keisha standing in her kitchen, probably using the landline of the neighbor Mrs. Jenkins because her cell service was dead. She would be wearing her silk robe hair in a bonnet, screaming into the receiver. "Tell her I am in a meeting," I said calmly. "I did tell her that, Ms. Sterling. She said to tell you that this isn't a game, and if you don't turn the internet back on, she is going to come down here and cause a scene. She says she is losing followers by the minute." I let out a dry laugh. Keisha had never worked a day in her corporate life. She had no idea that security in my building required a badge just to use the elevator. Tell her that if she shows up, security will escort her out. And tell her that the internet bill is in my name. I have the right to cancel services I do not use. Then hang up. There was a pause. "Yes, ma'am." I watched the blinking light on my phone turn off. I felt a pang of guilt deep in my stomach. It was a reflex conditioned by years of emotional manipulation. The voice in my head sounded like my father. "You are selfish, Sophia. Family helps family." I silenced the voice. I looked at the audit in front of me. This CEO I was investigating had embezzled $2 million to fund his wife's gambling habit while his employees lost their pensions. He justified it by saying he was protecting his family. It was the same logic. Toxic loyalty was just theft by another name. At lunchtime, I went to the break room to get water. My personal cell phone, which was still on silent, lit up. It was a voicemail. Not from Keisha. From my mother. She must have gone to the public library or a coffee shop to get Wi-Fi because the call came through an internet app. I stared at the notification. Mom. 12:43 p.m. Duration 5 minutes and 12 seconds. I should have deleted it. I should have just pressed the trash icon and gone back to my work. But the little girl inside me, the one who just wanted her mother to say she was proud, still had a heartbeat. I put my AirPods in and pressed play. Sophia. My mother's voice was not screaming. It was worse. It was that low, trembling tone she used when she wanted to play the martyr. I do not know who you think you are. You walked out on your family. You embarrassed us in front of Brad. Do you know he was up all night pacing? He is trying to build a future for this family, and you sabotaged him. I took a sip of water, my hand tightening around the cup. And then to cut off the phones, my mother continued, her voice rising. How petty can you be? Your father has a doctor's appointment next week. What if the office calls to confirm? You are putting his health at risk. You are a cruel, ungrateful child. We sacrificed everything for you. We gave you a home. We fed you. And the moment you get a little bit of money, you think you are better than us. I closed my eyes. They did not sacrifice everything. I worked 3 jobs in college to pay my tuition. I bought my own first car. I paid rent to them the moment I turned 18 until I moved out. You need to fix this, Sophia, my mother demanded. Turn the phones back on, transfer the money for the car, apologize to Brad. If you do not, I swear on my mother's grave I will wash my hands of you. Do not bother coming to Christmas. Do not bother coming to Sunday dinner. You will be dead to us until you learn your place. The message ended. I stood there in the quiet break room, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Dead to us. For years, I had been running myself into the ground, trying to stay alive in their eyes, trying to be seen, trying to be enough. And all it took was one word. No. One boundary. And I was dead to them. I looked at my reflection in the window. I did not see a dead woman. I saw a woman who was finally breathing for the first time. I opened my phone settings. I went to the blocked list. I added my mother's number. Then I added the neighbor's number just in case. I went back to my desk. Elena was waiting with a fresh cup of coffee. Is everything okay, Ms. Sterling? She asked, noticing my pale face. Everything is fine, Elena, I said, sitting down and picking up my pen. Actually, it is better than fine. I just cleared some bad debt from my personal ledger. I went back to work. For the rest of the afternoon, I did not think about Range Rovers or disconnected routers. I thought about the future, my future. A future where my money stayed in my account and my peace stayed in my heart. But as the sun went down and I packed up to leave, I knew this was just the opening shot. My mother was a woman who needed an audience, and I had just walked off her stage. She would not let me go quietly. She would find a way to drag me back. I walked to the elevator, checking my email. A notification popped up from my bank. Attempted transaction declined. Netflix. $19.99. I smiled. It was petty, but it felt like justice. I stepped out into the cool night air of Chicago. I had 24 hours of silence. I suspected the noise was about to get much louder. But for tonight, I was going to order takeout drink, a glass of wine that no one would pour into a plant, and sleep in a bed that I paid for. Good to know, I whispered to myself, repeating the words that set me free. Good to know. I knew exactly where my sister was at 1 o'clock in the afternoon because Keisha was a creature of expensive habits. Every Tuesday she held court at Le Jardin, a French bistro downtown, where the salads cost $30 and the waiters judged you by the season of your handbag. She called it networking, but in reality, It was just a group of women spending money they did not earn to impress people they did not like. For years, I had funded these little excursions without complaint. I told myself it was harmless. I told myself that letting Keisha have a supplementary credit card for emergencies was the responsible thing to do as a big sister. But Keisha's definition of an emergency had evolved from a flat tire to a shortage of truffle fries and bottomless mimosas. I sat in my office 40 floors above the city and opened my banking app. It was a sleek, dark interface that usually gave me a sense of control. Today, it gave me a sense of anticipation. I navigated to the credit card management tab. There it was, the Platinum card, ending in 4098. Authorized user Keisha Sterling. Status active. I hovered my finger over the toggle switch. It was such a small motion, a fraction of an inch, but it carried the weight of a decade of resentment. I tapped the screen. The status changed to frozen. I leaned back in my chair and took a sip of my coffee. Now I just had to wait. Across town, the scene was unfolding exactly as I imagined. Keisha was likely sitting at the best table by the window surrounded by her friends Tiffany and Monet. They were the kind of women who inspected your cuticles before they looked you in the eye. Keisha would be loud today, louder than usual, because she needed to compensate for the silence in her house. She would be bragging about the Range Rover she was supposedly getting. She would be talking about Brad's startup as if it were the next Facebook. She would order the most expensive bottle of champagne on the menu, not because she liked the taste, but because she wanted to post the label on her Instagram story. I checked the time. Checked the 1:45. The bill would be arriving right about now. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a push notification from the bank. Transaction declined. Le Jardin. Amount $482. I smiled. It was a cold smile, one that did not reach my eyes. $400 for lunch. Yesterday she was begging me for a car down payment, claiming they were struggling to build a future. Today she was drinking away a mortgage payment. The audacity was breathtaking. I watched the screen. Another buzz. Transaction declined. Le Jardin. Same amount. I could see it clearly. The waiter, a man named Jean-Paul, who had zero patience for pretenders, would have returned to the table with that tight, polite smile that meant trouble. He would have leaned down and whispered that there was a problem with the card. Keisha would have laughed it off. She would have flipped her hair and told him to run it again, claiming the chip was sensitive. She would have made a show of being annoyed by the inconvenience performing for her friends. Buzz. Transaction declined. By now the performance would be cracking. Tiffany and Monet would be exchanging glances. The silence at the table would be deafening. Keisha's face would be heating up beneath her layers of contour. She would reach for her phone. She would dial the one person she thought could save her. My office phone did not ring because I had blocked her number yesterday. But on my cell phone I saw a missed call from a restricted number. She was trying to bypass the block. I let it go to voicemail. She would panic now. She couldn't call Mom because Mom had no money. She couldn't call Dad because Dad was at work and he didn't believe in credit cards. So she would call Brad, her husband, the provider, the tech mogul. I imagined Keisha huddled in the bathroom of the bistro, dialing Brad's number over and over again, her fingers trembling. She needed him to transfer cash. She needed him to bring a card. She needed him to be the man he pretended to be. But Brad did not answer. Of course he didn't. I knew from my private investigator reports that Brad was currently at a sports bar on the south side trying to win back his losses from the weekend. He was not looking at his phone. He was looking at a parlay sheet and praying for a miracle. Keisha had to walk back to that table. She had to sit down in front of the women she had spent years trying to impress. She had to look them in the eye and say the words that tasted like ash in her mouth. I forgot my wallet. Or maybe she said there was a fraud alert on her account. It didn't matter what lie she told. Tiffany and Monet knew. They smelled the desperation. One of them probably offered to cover the bill, but they did it with that pitying tone that cuts deeper than an insult. Don't worry, girl. You can Venmo me when you get it sorted. That Venmo would never come. And Keisha knew that as soon as she left that restaurant, the group chat without her in it would light up. My phone buzzed one last time, a text from the bank. Fraud alert, multiple failed attempts, card blocked for security. I swiped the notification away and went back to my spreadsheet. The silence from my family was over. The storm was coming. That evening, I received a text from my neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins. Honey, I think there is trouble at your parents' house. Never heard screaming like this. I didn't need to be there to know the script. Keisha had stormed into the house, humiliated and furious. She had waited for Brad to come home, and then she had unleashed the hurricane. She would be screaming about the embarrassment, about how I had set her up. She would twist the narrative until she was the victim. Sophia knew I was going to lunch. She did this on purpose to shame me. She is jealous of my social life. She wants to see me fail. And Brad, being the master manipulator he was, would not take responsibility for not answering his phone. He would pivot. He would agree with her. Babe, you are right, he would say, pacing around the living room, while my parents looked on anxiously. Your sister is playing dirty. She is trying to control us with her money. She thinks she owns us just because she paid a few bills. It is financial abuse. My mother would nod vigorously. It is disgusting, she would chime in, leaving her sister stranded like that. What if it was a real emergency? She has no heart. Then Brad would drop the hook. He would look at my weeping sister and my worried parents and he would puff out his chest. Don't worry, he would say. We don't need her. I was going to wait to tell you guys, but my crypto project is about to launch. We are talking 10x returns in the first week. I just need a little more capital to finalize the liquidity pool. Once that hits, we will buy that restaurant and fire that waiter. We will buy 2 Range Rovers. My father, who didn't know the difference between Bitcoin and a Chuck E. Cheese token, would look at Brad with hope in his eyes. You really think so, son? He would ask. I know so, Dad. Brad would lie smooth as silk. We just need to weather this storm. Sophia thinks she can starve us out, but she doesn't know I am about to change everything. They clung to his lies because the alternative was admitting they had bet on the wrong horse. They needed Brad to be the savior because if he wasn't, then they had thrown away their only loyal daughter for nothing. I sat in my apartment that night eating takeout sushi and watching the city lights. I knew they were plotting. I knew Brad was about to ask them for something big to cover his tracks, and I knew they would give it to him. I took a sip of wine. They called me petty. They called me jealous. They didn't understand that I wasn't trying to punish them. I was trying to wake them up. But some people sleep so deep the only way to wake them is to remove the roof over their heads. I checked my email one last time before bed. There was a notification from the credit bureau. New inquiry detected. Second mortgage application. Marcus and Linda Sterling. I sighed. Brad moved fast. He was going to drain them dry. Part of me wanted to call them, to scream the truth, to tell them that Brad was a con artist and they were signing their death warrant. But I remembered the restaurant. I remembered the plastic chair. You are always last. I closed my laptop. If they wanted to follow Brad off a cliff, I would not stand in the way. I would just be there to buy the wreckage when they crashed. That evening, the atmosphere in my parents' living room was thick enough to choke on. I was not there physically, but I knew the layout of that room better than I knew the back of my own hand. My father would be sitting in his recliner nursing a glass of cheap whiskey because the good stuff was gone. My mother would be pacing the floor, wringing her hands and muttering about how I had embarrassed the family name. Keisha was undoubtedly on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, deleting comments from people asking why she had left the bistro so quickly. And then there was Brad. I learned later from neighbors and from piecing together the financial wreckage exactly what Brad did that night. He did not apologize for missing Keisha's call. He did not offer to pay her back for the humiliation. Instead, he did what every con artist does when they are backed into a corner. He doubled down. He stood in the center of the room and commanded their attention like a preacher at a revival. He told them that the credit card decline was a sign. He said it was the universe telling them that relying on Sophia's crumbs was beneath them. He paced back and forth, his voice rising with false passion. "Sophia controls you," he said. "She dangles her money over your heads like a carrot. She thinks because she pays the bills she owns you. Is that how you want to live? Asking your daughter for permission to buy a car. Asking your daughter for permission to eat." My father, Marcus, a man who had worked in a factory for 30 years before retiring, a man who prided himself on being the head of the household, felt those words hit his ego like a sledgehammer. He sat up straighter. "You are right, son," he said. "It is disrespectful. She has forgotten her place." Brad nodded, seizing the momentum. He pulled a crumpled folder from his bag. He didn't open it. He just held it, like it contained the secrets of the universe. "That is why I have been working so hard," he said. "I have been building something that will make Sophia's salary look like pocket change. It is a new tech startup, a hybrid platform combining artificial intelligence with blockchain liquidity." My parents had no idea what blockchain liquidity meant. To be honest, Brad probably didn't either. But the words sounded expensive. They sounded like the future. They sounded like the kind of things white men in Silicon Valley used to become billionaires overnight. Keisha perked up. "Is this the project you told me about? The one with the investors from Dubai?" Brad smiled at her, a benevolent, patient smile. "Exactly, babe. The investors are ready. But here's the catch. To get the full valuation, I need to show skin in the game. I need to bring a buy-in. $250,000. My mother gasped. $250,000. Brad, we don't have that kind of money. You know we don't. Brad looked down at the floor, acting defeated. I know, Mom. And that is why I didn't want to ask. I was going to let the deal go. I was going to let us keep living under Sophia's thumb. But after today, after seeing how she treated Keisha, I couldn't stand it. I want to give you the world. I want to buy you a house in Florida. I want to buy Dad a boat. I want Keisha to drive that Range Rover without asking anyone for permission. He let the silence hang there. He knew their triggers. My mother wanted status. My father wanted respect. Keisha wanted luxury. My father cleared his throat. We have the house, he said quietly. Brad looked up, feigning surprise. The house? Oh no, Dad. I couldn't ask you to do that. That is your home. It is our only asset, my father said, standing up. Sophia paid off the mortgage 5 years ago. It is sitting there free and clear. It is worth at least $400,000 in this market. My mother looked nervous. But Marcus, if we leverage the house, what if something goes wrong? Nothing will go wrong. Brad interrupted, his eyes wide and sincere. This is guaranteed. The AI algorithm predicts a 300% return in the first quarter alone. In 3 months, I will pay off the loan and put $500,000 in your bank account. You will never have to answer to Sophia again. You will be the ones helping her. Imagine that. Imagine that. The thought of being richer than me, of finally being the ones to look down on me, was too intoxicating to resist. It was the ultimate revenge for the bruised ego of a patriarch who felt emasculated by his daughter's success. My father walked to the safe in the hallway closet. He dialed the combination. I knew that combination. It was my birthday. The irony was suffocating. He pulled out the deed to the house. The deed that I had handed to them with a bow on it on Christmas morning 5 years ago. He brought it back to the living room and placed it on the coffee table. We can do a home equity line of credit, my father said. I know a guy at the bank. If we go tomorrow, we can have the funds in 48 hours. Brad didn't grab the papers immediately. He was too smart for that. He hesitated. Are you sure, Dad? I only want to do this if we are a team. If we are doing this for the family. We are a family, my father said firmly, and families support each other's dreams, unlike some people. Keisha clapped her hands. Oh my God, we are going to be rich. I am going to look at listings in Miami tonight. They spent the rest of the night celebrating with cheap beer and delusions of grandeur. They toasted to the future. They toasted to Brad. They toasted to their freedom from me. The next morning, I was sitting in a glass-walled conference room, reviewing a quarterly risk assessment when my phone buzzed. It was a specific vibration pattern I had set for urgent financial alerts. I glanced at the screen. It was an alert from the Credit Monitoring Bureau. New inquiry, second mortgage application, 123 Maple Street. I froze. My name was not on the deed anymore, but because I had originally co-signed the loan years ago, and my credit history was still linked to the address for certain mail monitoring services, I got the ping. I opened the notification. The amount requested was $250,000. The lender was a predatory subprime institution known for high interest rates and fast approvals. The kind of place you went to when you were desperate. I knew exactly what had happened. I put the pieces together instantly. Brad needed cash. He had convinced them to bet the house that was their safety net, the house that was their retirement. My finger hovered over the contact button for the bank. I could stop this. One call. I could tell them that the applicants were victims of elder financial abuse. I could flag the application for fraud review. I could hire a lawyer to place a lis pendens on the property to freeze the asset. I could save them from themselves. I looked out the window at the Chicago skyline. I remembered the way my father pointed his finger in my face. You are always last. If I stopped them now, they would hate me for it. They would say I was jealous. They would say I crushed Brad's dream. They would say I was trying to keep them poor so I could control them. There was no winning. I realized then that you cannot save people who are determined to drown, especially when they think the water is gold. They needed to feel the weight of their choices. They needed to see Brad not for the savior they imagined, but for the anchor he was. I took a sip of my sparkling water. It was cool and crisp. I swiped the notification away. Archive. I turned back to the risk assessment on the table. The client was asking about mitigating losses in a volatile market. Sometimes I said aloud to the empty room, the only way to mitigate loss is to let the crash happen and be ready to buy the pieces. I let them sign the papers. I let them hand over $250,000 to a man who couldn't even keep a checking account in the positive. I let them sell their security for a lie, and I went back to work making more money in an hour than Brad would likely see in his entire lifetime. The clock was ticking now. 30 days. That was usually how long it took for a scheme like this to unravel. I marked the date on my calendar, not as a deadline, but as an appointment with destiny. Sunday morning in our community is not merely a religious obligation, it is a theatrical production. It is a runway for hats that defy gravity and a courtroom where the jury consists of women in white gloves and the judge holds a microphone. Despite the war zone that my relationship with my parents had become, I found myself driving to Greater Mount Zion AME Church. I told myself it was out of respect for my grandmother who had laid the cornerstone of this building with her own money. But deep down I think I went, because I refused to let them chase me out of every room I belonged in. I refused to let them take God from me too. I arrived 5 minutes late intentionally. I wanted to slip into the back pew unnoticed. But in a congregation where everyone knows everyone's business, being invisible is impossible. As I walked down the side aisle, the whispering started. It rippled through the pews like a wave. Heads turned. Fans with funeral home logos stopped moving. I could feel their eyes scanning my outfit, calculating the cost of my dress, and comparing it to the story my mother had undoubtedly spun during Sunday school. I saw my family sitting in the third row, the prominence reserved for the pillars of the church. My father Marcus sat with his back stiff, looking like a man carrying the weight of the world. Brad sat next to him, looking surprisingly awake given his late-night gambling habits, though he wore dark sunglasses inside the sanctuary, which he probably thought made him look mysterious, but actually just made him look hungover. Keisha was there too, wearing a new dress that I knew she couldn't afford, looking around to make sure people were watching her pretend to pray. And then there was my mother, Linda. She was in her element. She sat with her head bowed, a lace handkerchief pressed to her eyes. She was performing the role of the grieving mother perfectly. She wasn't grieving a death, she was grieving a credit limit. But the congregation didn't know the difference. I took a seat near the back next to Mrs. Higgins, a deaf woman who was the only person happy to see me because she couldn't hear the gossip. The service proceeded as usual until the sermon began. Pastor Davis, a man who had enjoyed many Sunday dinners at my parents' table and who drove a Cadillac that my father's tithes helped pay for, stepped up to the pulpit. He adjusted his glasses and looked out over the crowd. His eyes lingered on the back row where I sat. "Today, church," he boomed, his voice echoing off the stained glass. "I want to talk about the spirit of stewardship. I want to talk about the sin of hoarding." My stomach tightened. I knew exactly where this was going. The Bible tells us that to whom much is given, much is required. He shouted, wiping sweat from his brow. We have people in our community, people right here in this room who have been blessed with abundance. They have high towers, they have overflow. But when their own flesh and blood calls out in need, they close their ears. They harden their hearts. "Amen," my mother shouted from the third row, throwing her hand up. "Preach, Pastor." I sat frozen. The air around me felt thin. "There is a sickness in our generation," Pastor Davis continued, pacing the stage. "It is the sickness of individualism. Young people think because they have a degree and a bank account, they don't need the foundation that built them. They cut off the vine and then wonder why their soul withers. You cannot honor God if you dishonor your father and mother. You cannot love the Lord if you do not support your brother." The congregation murmured in agreement. I felt the judgment pressing against my skin like a physical weight. They weren't talking about theology, they were talking about me. My mother had weaponized the pulpit. She had turned the one place where I should have felt safe into a public tribunal. When the sermon ended and the choir began to sing the invitation hymn, I thought the torture was over. I was wrong. It was time for the passing of the peace, the part of the service where everyone stands up and hugs their neighbors. Usually this was my favorite part. Today, it was a gauntlet. I stood up, intending to make a quick exit, but I was blocked by Aunt Sarah. She wasn't my real aunt, just one of those community elders who felt entitled to parent everyone. She wore a hat with a purple feather that bobbed accusingly as she approached me. "Sophia," she said, her voice loud enough to cut through the organ music. "I was surprised to see you here, after what you did to your poor mother." "Hello, Aunt Sarah," I said, keeping my voice level. "It is good to see you. Don't you hello me," she snapped, pulling me into a stiff embrace that felt more like a restraint. "Look at your mother. She is heartbroken. She told the prayer circle that you left them in the dark. Literally. How could you be so cold? That woman wiped your bottom. She sacrificed for you. And you treat her like a stranger because of a little money." "It is not about money," I whispered, trying to pull away. "It is always about money with you big shots," she hissed. "You think you are better than us. But remember, Sophia, you can't take it with you. Go fix this. Go hug your mother and write her a check. God doesn't like ugly." She released me and turned her back. I looked around. Other eyes were on me. Disapproving eyes. Disappointed eyes. People I had known my whole life were looking at me like I was a monster because I refused to be a victim anymore. I looked toward the front. My mother was now surrounded by a group of deacons' wives. She was sobbing into their shoulders, letting them pat her back. She was milking every ounce of sympathy, feeding on the attention. She looked over their shoulders and locked eyes with me. For a second the tears stopped and a look of pure malice crossed her face. It was a look that said, "Submit, or I will destroy you." I broke eye contact. I couldn't do this. I couldn't stand here and let them use God to manipulate me. I grabbed my purse and turned toward the heavy oak doors. I walked fast, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor. I just wanted to get to the safety of my car. I wanted to drive back to my quiet apartment where the only judgment came from my own reflection. As I reached the vestibule, the area between the sanctuary and the outside world, I saw a figure leaning against the wall near the water fountain. It was Brad. He wasn't in the sanctuary comforting his distraught mother-in-law. He wasn't praying for his startup. He was hiding in the lobby, enjoying the air conditioning and playing on his phone. He didn't see me approach. The thick carpet of the vestibule muffled my steps, and he was too engrossed in his screen. He was smiling a goofy, relaxed smile that I had never seen him direct at my sister. I slowed down. My auditor instincts kicked in. I moved silently to the side, approaching him from his blind spot. He was typing furiously. The font size on his phone was large, a habit for someone who refused to wear reading glasses. I could see the screen clearly over his shoulder. The contact name at the top of the chat was Sugar, not Keisha, not Wifey. Sugar. I read the message he had just sent. "Don't worry, baby." The old man signed the papers. "The loan is processing. I'll have the cash by Tuesday. We are going to Vegas just like I promised, first class." A bubble popped up. A reply from Sugar. "You better. I'm tired of waiting." "Does your wife know?" Brad typed back. "She thinks it's for business. She's clueless. Just be ready." My breath caught in my throat. The puzzle pieces slammed together. The loan, the urgency, the manipulation. He wasn't investing in a startup. He wasn't trying to save the family. He was stealing $250,000 to run away with a mistress. He was going to destroy my parents. He was going to take their home, their equity, and their pride and blow it on a weekend in Vegas with a woman named Sugar. I stood there for a moment watching him. I could confront him right now. I could snatch the phone, scream at him, drag him into the sanctuary, and show my father the truth. I could be the hero, but then I remembered the sermon, the sin of individualism. I remembered Aunt Sarah. God doesn't like ugly. I remembered my father's voice. "You are always last." If I made a scene now, Brad would deny it. He would say Sugar was an investor. He would say I was spying. He would say I fabricated the text. And my family, desperate to believe in their white savior, would believe him. They would hate me for trying to burst their bubble. I stepped back silently. I watched Brad hit send and chuckle to himself. I pushed open the heavy church doors and stepped out into the blinding sunlight. I had the truth, and truth was a weapon. But I wasn't going to fire it yet. I was going to let Brad pull the trigger himself. I walked to my car, my hands shaking not from fear but from rage. I sat in the driver's seat and took a deep breath. "You want a offering, Pastor Davis?" I whispered to the empty car. "You want to see what happens when the ATM shuts down and the auditor starts working." I put the car in gear. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to my office. I had a background check to run on a phone number and a flight to Vegas to track. My family wanted drama. I was about to give them a masterpiece. I drove away from the church with the engine of my car humming a low, steady rhythm that matched the cold calculation of my heartbeat. Most women discovering their brother-in-law was plotting to bankrupt their parents and run off with a mistress would have driven straight to their mother's house. They would have screamed. They would have cried. They would have begged for someone to listen. I drove straight to my office. Crying does not solve fraud. Evidence does. I knew my family. If I walked in there right now and told them Brad was texting a woman named Sugar, they would call me crazy. They would say I was jealous. They would say I was trying to ruin their happiness because I was bitter and alone. They needed proof, undeniable concrete proof that would shatter their delusions. I arrived at my quiet, empty office building on a Sunday afternoon. The security guard nodded at me, surprised to see me, but he asked no questions. Up on the 45th floor, I unlocked my laptop and pulled up my secure contacts. I didn't need a lawyer yet. I needed eyes. I called Marcus Thorne. He was a private investigator my firm used for high-stakes corporate espionage. He was expensive, discreet, and terrifyingly efficient. He picked up on the second ring. "I need a full workup on a subject," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Name is Brad Davis. Or at least that is what he calls himself." I gave him the license plate of Brad's car and the few digits of the phone number I had memorized from the screen over his shoulder. I told him I needed everything: financials, associates, criminal history, and I needed to know who belongs to a number saved as sugar. Thorne didn't ask why, he just asked for the deposit. I wired him $5,000 without blinking. It was a small price to pay for the truth. While I waited for the digital forensic report to compile, I sat in my leather chair and stared at the city skyline. It was ironic. My parents thought I was hoarding my money out of greed. They didn't understand that money was a shield. It bought safety. It bought clarity. It bought the ability to see the wolves before they tore your throat out. My phone buzzed with a notification from Instagram. It was Keisha. She had unblocked me just long enough to tag me in a post. I clicked on it knowing it was designed to hurt me. It was a photo of her hand resting on a steering wheel, holding a bright orange Hermes Birkin bag. The caption was a paragraph of emojis, followed by words that made my stomach turn. My husband treats me like a queen. Some people work hard, I just receive hard. Thanks, baby, for the early celebration gift. To all the haters watching, watch us rise. I zoomed in on the photo. I own 3 Birkins. I bought them with my own bonuses after 80-hour work weeks. I know the stitching. I know the grain of the leather. I know the weight of the hardware. The bag in Keisha's lap was a tragedy. The stitching was uneven. The gold stamp was too high. The leather looked stiff and plasticky, even through the filter she had used. It was a Canal Street knockoff worth maybe $50 on a good day. Brad had bought her a fake bag to keep her quiet while he stole real money from her parents. It was almost impressive how little respect he had for her intelligence. And the worst part was, she believed it. She was so desperate to project an image of wealth that she couldn't see the cheap plastic reality in her hands. I scrolled through the comments. My mother's friends were commenting, "Blessed and you deserve it, honey." Brad had commented, "Only the best for my queen. Just wait until next week, when the loan money hit, when he would be in Vegas with sugar." My computer chimed. Incoming encrypted file from Thorne. It had only been 3 hours, but Thorne was worth every penny. I opened the dossier. The first thing I saw was a mugshot. It was Brad, but younger. His hair was different, and he had a thin mustache, but that smug, weak chin was unmistakable. The name on the booking sheet wasn't Brad Davis. It was Bradley Davidson. I read the summary and felt a chill go down my spine. Charges included wire fraud, identity theft, and romance confidence schemes in Florida and Georgia. He wasn't a tech entrepreneur. He was a predator who targeted elderly couples with gullible daughters. He would marry and drain the parents' retirement accounts and vanish before the indictment came down. He had done this before. Twice. My parents weren't investors in a startup. They were his exit strategy. The startup didn't exist. The AI algorithm didn't exist. The only thing that existed was a trail of broken families and maxed-out credit cards in the South. I scrolled down to the financials. His credit score was in the low 400s. He had judgments against him totaling over $80,000. And then there was the phone number for sugar. Thorne had traced it. It belonged to a woman named Candace, verifying the nickname Sugar. She was an exotic dancer at a high-end club in the city. Her social media was public. I clicked through her photos. She was stunning in a flashy, dangerous way, and in her most recent post from last night, she was wearing a diamond bracelet. The caption read, "Daddy promised me a trip to Sin City, counting down the days." Daddy. My stomach churned. He was taking my father's hard-earned equity, the house my father had worked 30 years in a factory to pay for, and he was using it to buy diamonds for a stripper. My phone buzzed again. A text from Thorne. "Subject is currently active." I opened the attachment. It was a grainy, low-light photograph taken with a long-range lens. It showed Brad sitting at a poker table in what looked like a basement with no windows. He had a stack of chips in front of him and a drink in his hand. He looked sweaty, desperate. Thorne added a caption. "Underground game on the west side. High stakes. He is down 40,000 tonight." And Sophia, look at the woman next to him. I zoomed in. A woman in a red dress was whispering in his ear. Her hand was on his knee. It was Sugar. She was watching him lose my parents' money and she didn't look worried. She looked bored. She was waiting for the big payout. I sat back in my chair. I had enough evidence to send him back to prison. I had the mugshots. I had the real name. I had the proof of the affair. I could drive to my parents' house right now. I could throw the photos on the table. I could scream, "Look at your savior. Look at where your money is going." But I stopped myself. If I went now before the loan money was gone, they would still find a way to blame me. They would say I dug up old dirt. They would say he had changed. They would say I was trying to ruin his reputation because I was jealous of Keisha. Brad would spin a story about how he was undercover or how those were old photos. He was a master manipulator, and they were willing victims. They had to feel the pain. They had to see the zero balance. They had to watch him walk away with their future before they would believe me. I saved the photos to a secure cloud drive. I closed the laptop. I could have commented on Keisha's picture right then. "Nice bag, ask your husband if he paid for it with his poker winnings." But I didn't. I let her have her moment with her fake bag, because soon, very soon, that plastic bag would be the only thing she had left. I picked up my phone and called Thorne. "Keep watching him," I said. "Don't intervene. Just document every dollar he loses. I want a paper trail that leads straight to hell." I hung up and walked out of the office. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. I felt heavy but strong. I was the villain in their story right now. But soon I would be the only reality they had left. And reality was coming for them fast. Tuesday afternoon arrived with the predictability of a clock pendulum swinging toward judgment. Most people assume that repossessions happen under the cover of darkness when the world is asleep. But I knew that the best way to collect a debt from someone like my sister was to do it when she was most visible. Keisha lived her life on a stage, so it was only fitting that her downfall happened in front of an audience. I had stopped making the lease payments on Keisha's white Range Rover Evoque exactly 63 days ago. It was one of the many bills I had quietly absorbed into my monthly budget years ago. A line item labeled family support that I had simply deleted the night of the Thanksgiving disaster. In the chaos of the internet being cut and the credit cards declining, Keisha had apparently forgotten that the car she drove around town like a queen's chariot was not actually hers. It was leased in my name with her, listed as the primary driver. When I stopped paying, the bank sent notices. I routed those notices directly to my trash folder. I wanted the natural consequences to ripen fully before they fell. And today the fruit was ready to drop. I was sitting in a cafe across the street from Polished, the most exclusive nail salon in our neighborhood. I wasn't there by accident. I had received a notification from the GPS tracker installed in the vehicle, a standard feature for high-end leases, alerting me that the car had been stationary for 45 minutes. I made a quick anonymous call to the asset recovery team, giving them the exact location. I watched through the tinted window of the cafe as a large flatbed truck turned the corner. It was loud and aggressive, the kind of vehicle that does not apologize for its presence. The driver, a man with thick arms and no patience, backed up toward the white Range Rover parked directly in front of the salon's glass storefront. Inside, I could see Keisha. She was sitting in a massage chair, getting a pedicure, laughing with her nail technician, probably telling stories about her wealthy husband and their upcoming trip to Vegas. She had no idea that her status symbol was about to be dragged away. The tow truck driver worked fast. He hooked the chains onto the front axle. The metallic clanking sound echoed down the street. Inside the salon, heads turned. I saw Keisha look up. Her smile dropped. She scrambled out of the chair, struggling with her foam flip-flops, and ran toward the door, her toes still separated by those little pink spacers. She burst onto the sidewalk, screaming, "Hey, what are you doing? That is my car, put it down right now." The driver didn't even look at her. He continued securing the winch. "Bank order, lady," he grunted. "Payments are 60 days past due. Step back." Keisha's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed with her foundation. "There must be a mistake," she shrieked, her voice cracking. My husband pays for this car. We are wealthy. You have the wrong vehicle. The driver paused and pulled a clipboard from his back pocket. He looked at the paper, then at the license plate. Range Rover Evoque, lease to Sophia Sterling. Primary driver Keisha Sterling. Unless you have $3,000 in cash right now, this car is going to the impound lot. The name Sophia hung in the air like a curse. Keisha froze. She looked around. People on the street were stopping to watch. The women inside the salon were pressing their faces against the glass, taking pictures. This was the nightmare she feared most. Being exposed as a fraud. Instead of paying the man or calling me to beg for mercy, Keisha did the only thing she knew how to do. She pulled out her phone. She didn't call Brad. She opened Instagram. I watched on my own phone as the notification popped up. Keisha Style is live. I tapped the screen. The video feed was shaky. Keisha was angling the camera so the tow truck was in the background, tears streaming down her face. She had mastered the art of the victim cry, pretty enough to garnish sympathy, but loud enough to demand attention. "Guys, you are not going to believe this," she sobbed into the camera. "My own sister. My own flesh and blood. She canceled the payments on my car without telling me. She is doing this to embarrass me. She is jealous of my happiness. She is jealous because Brad loves me and she is alone." Comments started flooding in. Most were from her circle of delusional friends, posting broken heart emojis and angry faces. "That is so toxic," one wrote. "She is just miserable, babe, ignore her," wrote another. Keisha wiped her nose carefully, avoiding her false lashes. "We were going to trade this car in next week anyway for the new model." She lied smoothly. "Brad has a surprise for me." But Sophia couldn't wait. She had to send a tow truck to my nail salon. Who does that to family? She is trying to break me, but she can't. Behind her, the truck engine roared to life. The Range Rover was lifted into the air, its white paint gleaming in the sun. It looked like a surrendered flag. "I am not going to let this stop me," Keisha declared, her voice trembling with manufactured resolve. "I am going to call my husband. He will fix this. We are going to sue the towing company, and we are going to sue Sophia for emotional distress." The tow truck pulled away, carrying her lie with it. Keisha stood on the curb in her foam flip-flops, looking small and ridiculous. The live stream ended abruptly, likely because she realized she had no way to get home. I closed the app and set my phone down on the cafe table. The tea in my cup was Earl Grey, hot and fragrant. I took a slow sip, savoring the bergamot. She called me jealous. She called me miserable. She told the world I was the villain. And the saddest part was, she truly believed it. She couldn't see that I wasn't the one who put her on that curb. She put herself there by building a life on a foundation of someone else's money. I looked at my watch. It was 2:30. My father had a dental appointment scheduled for tomorrow morning. He needed a root canal, a procedure that cost roughly $2,000 without insurance. I had paid the premiums on their dental plan for 5 years. It was a comprehensive policy, the kind that covered major procedures. But as I watched Keisha standing on the sidewalk typing furiously on her phone, probably texting Brad to come pick her up, I realized that my charity had run its course. They called me the bank. They called me the ATM. But banks close. ATMs run out of cash. I opened the insurance provider app on my phone. I scrolled down to the dependents section. Marcus Sterling. Linda Sterling. I tapped the policy management tab. Cancel coverage. A warning box popped up. "Are you sure you want to cancel this policy? Coverage will terminate immediately, and no refunds will be issued." I looked across the street one last time. Keisha was sitting on a bench now, looking defeated. A yellow taxi pulled up. She got in. She didn't have a ride from her husband. She didn't have a Range Rover. And as of this moment, her father didn't have a dental plan. I tapped confirm. The screen loaded for a second, then displayed a green check mark. Policy canceled. I finished my tea. The warmth spread through my chest, but it wasn't just the tea. It was the feeling of a weight being lifted. For years I had carried them on my back. Now I was setting them down. If they couldn't stand on their own 2 feet, that wasn't my fault. I left a $20 tip on the table and walked out of the cafe. The tow truck was long gone. The street was quiet again. I walked to my own car, a sleek black sedan that I owned outright. I got in and started the engine. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the private investigator Thorne. Subject is moving funds. He just bought 2 first-class tickets to Las Vegas, departing Friday morning. I smiled. The car was just the appetizer. The main course was coming on Friday, and my family was going to be so hungry by then they would choke on the truth. Friday morning arrived with the sound of a financial guillotine dropping, but only I could hear the blade whistling through the air. My parents woke up expecting to be rich. They expected Brad to walk into the kitchen with a smile and a bank notification showing that their $250,000 had miraculously turned into $1 million. They had spent the last 3 days spending money they did not have in their heads planning vacations and renovations. But in my office across town, I was watching the Bloomberg terminal with a grim sense of satisfaction. The crypto exchange that Brad claimed to be using, a platform called NexaTrade, had just gone dark. It wasn't a glitch. It was a rug pull. The founders had vanished with $2 billion of investor money. Of course, Brad had never actually put their money into NexaTrade. My private investigator Thorne had confirmed that the $250,000 from the home equity loan had been split. $100,000 went to a bookie in Atlantic City to cover old debts. $50,000 went to the jewelry store for Sugar's diamonds. And the rest was currently sitting in a burner account, ready to fund his escape to Vegas. But Brad needed a cover story. He needed a reason why the money wasn't available so he could buy himself time to get to the airport. I watched the drama unfold through the lens of the security cameras I had installed in the house years ago. I had technically transferred the account to my father, but he never changed the password, so I still had access. It felt voyeuristic, but I told myself I was gathering evidence for the inevitable lawsuit. The kitchen was tense. My mother was frying bacon, but the smell of grease couldn't mask the smell of desperation. Brad was sitting at the table tapping furiously on his laptop. He was sweating. Visible beads of perspiration were rolling down his forehead despite the house being cool. "Any update, son?" my father asked. He was trying to sound casual, but his voice was tight. The loan officer called. "The first payment on the equity line is due next week." Brad didn't look up. "It is just a technical glitch, Dad. The server is overloaded because of the volume. Everyone is trying to cash out their profits at once. The liquidity pool is just rebalancing. It happens all the time with high-yield assets." Liquidity pool. Rebalancing. Words he had picked up from YouTube videos to sound smart. My father nodded, pretending to understand. "So the money is safe?" my mother asked, turning from the stove. "Safe as houses," Brad lied, his voice cracking slightly. "It is just frozen for 24 hours. Security protocol. By tomorrow morning we will be popping champagne." I took a sip of my coffee in my office. Tomorrow morning he planned to be on a flight with Sugar. He was stalling them. But reality has a way of intruding on even the best constructed lies. While Brad was spinning tales about servers and algorithms, a white van pulled up to the curb outside. It wasn't a limousine. It was the city water and power department. I had stopped paying the utility bills on Monday. The grace period for the water bill had expired yesterday. I watched on the exterior camera as a technician in a yellow vest walked up the driveway with a long metal tool. He wasn't coming to read the meter. He was coming to shut off the valve. Inside the house, nobody noticed until my mother went to fill the kettle. She turned the faucet handle. A sputtering sound echoed through the pipes, followed by a pathetic drip. Then nothing. "Marcus," she called out. "The water is off." My father frowned. "What do you mean the water is off?" "I mean nothing is coming out. Check the bathroom." My father walked down the hall. I heard him curse. He came back into the kitchen looking bewildered. "I don't understand. Sophia always handles the utilities." Keisha looked up from her phone. "She is so petty. She probably canceled it just to spite us." "Brad, you need to pay it. Use the profit from the crypto." Brad froze. He couldn't pay the water bill. He couldn't even pay for a pizza. His entire plan hinged on keeping every cent of the remaining cash for his getaway. I can't access the funds right now, babe, he stammered. I told you the system is down. Can't Dad just write a check? My father slammed his hand on the table. I just mortgaged my house for you, Brad. I don't have any cash left in the checking account. The pension check doesn't come until the 1st. The lights in the kitchen flickered. It was a warning. The electric company was next. The house that had been their sanctuary was slowly turning into a tomb. No water. Soon, no power. And a mortgage they couldn't pay on a house that was now leveraged to the hilt. I sat in my office and felt a wave of sadness. Not for Brad, not for Keisha, but for my father. He was a proud man, he had worked hard, but he had let his desire to be the patriarch blind him to the truth. He wanted a son so badly that he let a wolf into the sheepfold. Brad stood up abruptly. I need to go to the office, he said. The Wi-Fi here is too slow. I need to get to a secure terminal to push the transaction through. Sit down, Brad, my father said. His voice was different now, lower, heavier. I really need to go, Marcus. I can fix this, but I need to leave. Sit down. My father walked over to the hallway where Brad's leather briefcase was sitting on the entry table. Brad had been guarding that bag like a nuclear football all week. He claimed it contained sensitive intellectual property. What are you doing, Dad? Brad asked, his eyes darting to the door. My father picked up the bag. You say you are a businessman. You say you have millions pending. But my water is off. My daughter's car got towed. And you are sweating like a man running from the police. He unzipped the bag. Hey, that is private property, Brad shouted, lunging forward. My father was 65, but he had spent 30 years lifting crates. He stiff-armed Brad with a strength that came from pure adrenaline and rage, pushing him back into the chair. Stay there. My father reached into the bag. He pulled out a laptop. He opened it. The screen was black. He pressed the power button. Nothing. He pressed it again. It is dead, my father said. I forgot the charger, Brad squeaked. My father reached back into the bag. He pulled out a stack of papers. They weren't business plans. They weren't stock certificates. He pulled out a thick envelope with a red stamp on it. It was crumpled as if someone had tried to hide it. My father put on his reading glasses. His hands were shaking. Final notice, he read aloud. Venetian Hotel and Casino. Collections Department, Mr. Bradley Davidson. He looked up. Davidson. Who is Davidson? Brad's face went pale white. My father continued reading. Outstanding debt regarding marker number 409. $42,000. Unless payment is received by Friday, legal action will be taken. My father reached into the bag again. He pulled out another letter. This one was handwritten on notebook paper. Brad, you have until the 15th. If you don't have my money, don't worry about the police. Worry about your knees. Vinny. The silence in the kitchen was louder than any scream. My mother covered her mouth. Keisha looked from the bag to her husband, her eyes wide with horror. My father dropped the letters on the table. They scattered like autumn leaves. You are not a tech mogul, he whispered. You are a gambler. Brad started to cry. It was a pathetic mewling sound. It got out of hand, Marcus. I was trying to win it back. I was going to double the money and pay off the house. The system. I have a system. My father looked at the letters, then at the deed to the house sitting on the counter. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The $250,000. The equity he had spent a lifetime building. It wasn't in a liquidity pool. It wasn't frozen. Where is my money, Brad? My father asked. Brad looked down. Where is my money? My father roared, grabbing Brad by the collar of his expensive shirt. It is gone, Brad sobbed. I had to pay Vinny. I had to buy the tickets. I thought I could win the rest back on the slots. My father let go of him. Brad slumped back into the chair. My mother slid to the floor, weeping. "We are homeless," she wailed. "We are going to be homeless." I watched on the monitor as my father stood in the center of his kitchen. The water was off. The money was gone. The son he wanted was a thief. And the daughter he had rejected was the only one who saw this coming. He looked up at the ceiling as if asking God for help. But God wasn't going to write a check. And neither was I. Not yet. They needed to sit in the darkness a little longer. They needed to understand that rock bottom wasn't just a place, it was a lesson. And class was just beginning. The silence in the kitchen following Brad's confession was not peaceful. It was the heavy, suffocating silence that precedes a catastrophe. My father stood there clutching the countertop, his knuckles white as he stared at the man he had championed over his own daughter. He opened his mouth to speak, to roar, to unleash the fury of a lifetime of hard work stolen in a week, but no sound came out. Instead, his face turned an alarming shade of gray, and his hand flew to his chest as if he had been shot. "Marcus," my mother screamed, dropping the dish rag she had been twisting nervously. My father did not answer. He swayed like a mighty oak that had finally been chopped through, and then he collapsed. He hit the linoleum floor with a sickening thud that shook the cabinets. The letters from the casino and the threats from the loan shark fluttered down around him like confetti at the world's saddest parade. I watched on the monitor as chaos erupted. For all their talk of being a strong, united family, they fell apart the instant real tragedy struck. Keisha screamed and backed away as if her father's condition was contagious. Brad stood frozen, looking at the door, calculating if he could step over my father's body and run before the ambulance arrived. It was my mother who finally dropped to her knees, checking for a pulse, her hands shaking so badly she could barely find his neck. "Call 911, she shrieked at Keisha. Keisha fumbled with her phone, her long, fake nails clicking against the screen uselessly. I can't get a signal," she sobbed, remembering too late that I had cut the service and the Wi-Fi was gone. "Brad, call them," my mother yelled. Brad pulled out his phone, but his hands were trembling. He dialed the number, his face pale. He wasn't worried about my father. He was worried that the paramedics would bring the police, and the police would ask about the money. I sat in my office, gripping the edge of my desk. I wanted to call. I wanted to send help. But I knew the ambulance was already on its way because I had called it the moment I saw my father's hand touch his chest. I was watching them panic while I had already acted. That was the difference between us. They reacted to the storm. I navigated it. The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and sirens. They loaded my father onto a stretcher oxygen mask over his face and sped off toward St. Luke's Hospital. My mother rode in the back, holding his hand, weeping. Keisha and Brad followed in Brad's leased car, driving in a terrified silence. At the hospital, the reality of their situation began to set in. The emergency room was a place of sterile efficiency where emotions did not pay the bills. My father was rushed behind double doors for stabilization, while my mother was directed to the registration desk. She walked up to the glass partition, her eyes red and swollen. She reached into her purse and pulled out the blue insurance card, the card I had paid for. The card that had covered every checkup, every prescription, and every emergency for the last decade. "My husband is in room 4, she told the receptionist, her voice trembling. "It is his heart. Here is our insurance." The receptionist, a woman who looked like she had seen every tragedy in the city, took the card and typed the numbers into her computer. She frowned. She typed them again. Then she picked up the phone and made a quick call. My mother tapped her fingers on the counter, looking back toward the doors where my father had disappeared. She just wanted this part to be over so she could go be with him. The receptionist hung up the phone and looked at my mother with a sympathetic but firm expression. "Ma'am, I am sorry, but this policy is not active." My mother blinked. "What do you mean?" "That is impossible. We have had Blue Cross for 10 years. The system shows coverage was terminated on Tuesday," the receptionist said, sliding the card back. "The primary account holder, Sophia Sterling, canceled the policy for non-payment of premiums by the dependents." My mother looked at the card as if it had turned into a snake. "Sophia," she whispered. "She did it. She actually did it. There must be a mistake, she stammered, trying to maintain her dignity. My daughter, there was a mix-up with the bank. Can you run it again? Or maybe bill us later. I cannot reactivate a cancelled policy, ma'am, the receptionist said gently. And because you do not have active coverage, Mr. Sterling is classified as a self-pay patient. At that moment, a doctor in scrubs walked out into the waiting room, looking for the family of Marcus Sterling. My mother rushed over Keisha and Brad, trailing behind her. Is he okay, doctor? Is he alive? He is stable for now, the doctor said, but he has a significant blockage in his left anterior descending artery. We call it the widowmaker. He needs an emergency angioplasty and likely a stent placement immediately. If we don't operate within the next hour, he will have a massive cardiac event that he likely won't survive. Do it, my mother cried. Save him. Please do whatever you have to do. The doctor nodded, then looked at the receptionist, who gave him a subtle shake of the head. The doctor's demeanor shifted slightly. He was a healer, but he worked for a business. Mrs. Sterling, because you are self-pay and this is a surgical procedure, the hospital requires a deposit before we can take him up to the cath lab. The estimated cost for the surgery and the ICU stay is roughly $100,000. We need $45,000 up front to proceed. $45,000. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. My mother gasped, clutching her chest. 45,000. We don't have that in cash. Can't we do a payment plan? The hospital administration can discuss payment plans for the balance, the doctor said, but for the initial procedure we need the deposit. Do you have a credit card or a certified check? My mother turned to Brad. The savior, the tech mogul, the man who had just stolen $250,000. Brad, she pleaded, you have to do something. Use the business account. Use whatever you have left. This is Marcus. This is your father-in-law. Brad stepped back, holding his hands up. I can't, Mom. I told you. The money is gone. I sent it to Vinny. I have $300 in my checking account. That's it. Keisha. My mother turned to my sister. What about your savings? What about the jewelry? Keisha looked down at her feet. I don't have any savings, Mom. And the jewelry? Brad sold most of the real stuff last month. The rest is fake. My mother looked around the waiting room. It was filled with strangers watching their family drama unfold. She looked at the clock on the wall. Every second that ticked by was a second closer to my father's heart stopping. They had the house, but the house was worthless now, tied up in a fraudulent loan. They had the cars, but one was towed and the other was leased. They had nothing. They had spent years calling me cheap, calling me selfish, calling me the one who didn't understand family. And now, standing on the precipice of death, they realized that I was the only thing that had ever stood between them and the abyss. My mother reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her hand was shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She scrolled past the blocked calls. She scrolled past the angry texts she had sent me earlier in the week. I sat in my office watching the sun dip below the horizon when my phone lit up. Mom. I stared at the screen. I had expected this call. I had rehearsed what I would say. I was going to tell her that this was the consequence of her choices. I was going to tell her to ask Brad for the money. But then I answered, and I didn't hear the arrogant woman who had told me I was dead to her. I heard a frightened child. Sophia! Her voice was cracked, broken. It was a whisper. Sophia, please. I am at the hospital. Daddy is dying. I didn't say anything. I just listened to her breathing. They need money, she sobbed. They need $45,000 or they won't operate. Brad stole it all. We have nothing. Please, Sophia, I know I said terrible things. I know we hurt you. But please don't let your father die. I am begging you. I will do anything. Just save him. I closed my eyes. I pictured my father lying on a gurney, scared and alone. I pictured Brad cowering in the corner. I pictured my mother on her knees in a public waiting room. The war was over. I had won. But the victory didn't taste sweet. It tasted like ash. Put the doctor on the phone, I said quietly. Sophia. Thank you. Oh God, thank you. Put him on the phone, Mom. I cut her off. I heard the rustling of the phone being passed. This is Dr. Evans, a male voice said. Dr. Evans, this is Sophia Sterling. I am the guarantor. I am faxing over my American Express Black Card authorization form right now, along with my identification. Run the deposit, do the surgery. Thank you, Ms. Sterling, the doctor said, relief evident in his voice. We will prep him immediately. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye to my mother. I sat in the darkness of my office. I had saved his life, but I wasn't done. I had just bought the ultimate leverage. And when my father woke up, he wasn't just going to owe me his life. He was going to owe me his submission. The check I just wrote was not a gift. It was a purchase price. And I had just bought the controlling stake in my family. 175. That was the final tally of missed calls on my phone screen when I finally turned it over 3 days after my father's surgery. Most daughters would see that number and assume the worst, imagining funeral arrangements or emergency complications. I looked at that number and saw panic, but not the medical kind. I knew my father was alive because I was receiving daily updates from Dr. Evans directly to my secure email. I knew the surgery had been a success and that the stent was holding. No, the 175 calls were not about life and death. They were about lifestyle and debt. They were the frantic clawing of people who had just realized that the ground beneath them had dissolved. I was not in Chicago. The moment the deposit cleared and my father was wheeled into the operating room, I boarded a flight to Napa Valley. I told myself it was a pre-planned business retreat, which was technically true, but in reality, I needed distance. I needed to sit in a vineyard surrounded by silence and expensive grapes to wash away the stench of my family's desperation. I had bought my father a second chance at life with a $45,000 swipe of my card. I felt that was enough charity for 1 week. But my family did not understand the concept of enough. They assumed that because I had opened the vault once, the door would remain ajar. They were wrong. I had put my phone on Do Not Disturb mode for everyone except the hospital staff. So while I was tasting a vintage Merlot overlooking the rolling hills of wine country, my mother and sister were experiencing the collapse of their world in real time. The voicemails they left were a masterclass in shifting narratives. The first 20 calls were tearful gratitude. Thank you, Sophia. You are an angel. God bless you. Then as the hours passed and the anesthesia wore off, the tone changed. Sophia, where are you? We need to talk about the house. The bank called again. Then came the anger. You can't just pay the bill and disappear. Brad is gone. We are scared. Pick up the phone, Brad, the tech mogul. The tech. The savior. According to the string of hysterical texts from Keisha, Brad had left the hospital waiting room shortly after I paid the deposit. He told them he was going to the bank to wire the funds for the mortgage payment to clear up the misunderstanding about the crypto crash. He said he needed to go to his office to get the physical tokens. He kissed Keisha on the forehead, told my mother not to worry, and walked out the automatic doors. That was 72 hours ago. He hadn't come back. His phone was disconnected. And when Keisha finally drove to the address he had listed as his office headquarters, she found a UPS store with a rented mailbox. I sat on the balcony of my hotel room, watching the sunset, and felt zero surprise. My private investigator Thorne had tracked Brad's movement. He hadn't gone to any office. He had gone straight to O'Hare International Airport. He boarded a flight to Las Vegas not with Sugar, but alone, because even Sugar had realized he was broke and dumped him at the last minute. Brad was currently hiding in a motel off the strip, likely trying to hustle a game of cards with the few $100s he had pocketed from selling his laptop. But my family didn't know that yet. They were still hoping he would walk through the door with a suitcase full of cash. Back in Chicago, the reality of their financial ruin was hitting Keisha harder than anyone else. My father was in the ICU, unable to work. My mother was by his side, unable to think. The house was days away from foreclosure. And they needed money for simple things like food, hospital parking, and the prescription meds my father would need upon discharge. Keisha did what she always threatened to do in her moments of arrogance. She decided to liquidate her assets. For years, she had bragged about her closet. She claimed her collection of handbags and shoes was an investment portfolio. These hold their value better than gold, she would say, snapping photos for Instagram. Desperate for cash, she packed 3 large suitcases. She took the Hermes Birkin Brad gave her. She took the limited edition Chanel flaps. She took the red-bottom Louboutin heels. She drove to the Gold Coast Consignment, the most reputable luxury reseller in the city. A place where the appraisers wore white gloves and could spot a stitch out of place from across the room. I know this because the owner of the shop is a client of mine. I handle her business audits. She called me that afternoon, not knowing the woman in her shop was my sister, just to share a story about a delusional customer. "You wouldn't believe it, Sophia," she told me over the phone, laughing. "This girl comes in looking like she owns the place. She dumps these bags on the counter and demands $20,000 in cash immediately. She says she is doing us a favor." I sipped my wine, asking her to continue. "My appraiser took one look and didn't even put on his gloves," she said. "Sophia. They were terrible fakes, I mean bad. The Birkin was made of vinyl. The Chanel had a serial number that belonged to a batch from 1995, but the bag was styled like a 2020 release. It was junk. Canal Street garbage." I closed my eyes, imagining Keisha's face. When we told her, the owner continued, she went crazy. She started screaming that we were lying. She said her husband paid $15,000 for that bag. She tried to show us the receipt on her phone, but it was just a screenshot of a text message. We had to ask security to escort her out because she started throwing the shoes. It was tragic, really. She honestly thought she was sitting on a gold mine. Keisha had walked out of that shop with her 3 suitcases of plastic trash and the crushing realization that her entire life was a counterfeit. Her husband was a fraud. Her wealth was a prop. And her arrogance was a joke. That was when the calls to me spiked. Call number 100. Call number 150. They weren't calling for a loan anymore. They were calling for a lifeline. They needed me to fix it. They wanted me to sue the consignment shop. They wanted me to find Brad. They wanted me to pay the mortgage. They wanted me to be the big sister again, the one who cleans up the mess while they sit in the corner and critique my methods. I looked at my phone again. A new voicemail from Keisha. "Sophia, please. I don't have money for gas to get back to the hospital." The man at the shop lied. He swapped my bags. I know he did. "Brad wouldn't do this to me. Please come home. Dad is asking for you. We need to figure out the house." The bank put a notice on the door today. It says 72 hours. "Sophia, please." I deleted the voicemail. I wasn't going to send gas money. I wasn't going to sue the shop. And I certainly wasn't going to find Brad. But I was going to go home. Not to save them. The time for saving was over. I had saved a life, and that was where my obligation ended. I was returning to handle business. The bank notice they were terrified of was the opportunity I had been waiting for. I opened my laptop and pulled up the foreclosure listing. The bank had accelerated the process due to the fraudulent nature of the loan Brad had secured. The debt was toxic, and the bank wanted to offload it fast. They were looking for a cash buyer who could close in 24 hours. Someone with liquidity. Someone who knew the property value. I drafted an email to my attorney. "Prepare the LLC, full cash offer on the Sterling property, 123 Maple Street, executed immediately upon foreclosure, and draft an eviction notice, standard timeline." I hit send. I finished my wine and stood up. The view of the vineyard was beautiful, but I had work to do in the city. My family wanted me to come home. They wanted their ATM back. They didn't realize that the ATM had been replaced by a landlord. And landlords expect rent on the first of the month, no exceptions. I packed my bag. I chose my sharpest suit for the flight home. A black power suit, appropriate for a funeral or a business merger. And in this case, it was going to be both. I was going back to bury their delusions and acquire their reality. I checked out of the hotel and got into the waiting town car. As we drove to the airport, I looked at my phone one last time. Call number 176 incoming. I let it ring. Let them wonder. Let them hope. Hope was the only thing they had left to lose, and I wanted to be there when it finally ran out. Dưới đây là phần kịch bản tiếp theo phần 11, được viết bằng tiếng Anh tuân thủ đúng văn phong giống kẻ ngôi thứ nhất, liên tục không ngắt quãng, và đảm bảo các yêu cầu về định dạng của bạn. The smell of St. Luke's Hospital was a mixture of antiseptic, floor wax, and desperation. But as I walked through the sliding glass doors of the main entrance, I brought my own atmosphere with me. I was wearing the black power suit I had flown in from Napa, with my hair pulled back in a severe bun, and my face devoid of any emotion other than cold determination. I wasn't here as a grieving daughter or a worried relative. I was here as the CEO of my own life, walking into a meeting to liquidate a failing subsidiary. I found them in the waiting room outside the cardiac ICU. They looked like refugees from a war they had started themselves. My mother was slumped in a vinyl chair wearing sweatpants that had seen better days, her hair unwashed and pulled back with a rubber band. Keisha was curled up next to her, looking smaller than I had ever seen her, stripped of her fake designer armor and her arrogance. Even from across the room, I could smell the fear on them. It was the scent of people who had run out of options. My mother looked up and saw me. For a second, I saw relief flash in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by that familiar look of entitlement. She didn't stand up to hug me. She didn't ask how my flight was. She didn't even say thank you for the $45,000 that was currently keeping her husband's heart beating. "You are finally here," she said, her voice raspy from crying. "We have been calling you for days. Do you have any idea what we have been through? The cafeteria food is expensive, and the parking garage charges $20 a day. I had to borrow cash from Aunt Sarah just to eat." I stopped in front of them, standing tall while they remained seated. I looked down at my mother. I looked at Keisha, who was staring at the floor, refusing to meet my eyes. "How is Dad?" I asked, my voice flat. "He is awake," my mother snapped. "He is asking for Brad. He is worried about the house. Sophia, you need to fix this." The bank put a notice on the door. "You have money. You need to write a check for the mortgage, and you need to find Brad. He went to wire the funds and he hasn't come back. Something must have happened to him. Maybe he was robbed." I almost laughed. The delusion was so thick it was suffocating. They were sitting in the wreckage of their lives and still trying to protect the arsonist. "He wasn't robbed, Mom," I said calmly. Keisha looked up, then her eyes red and swollen. "How do you know?" "You don't know anything. You have been drinking wine in California while we suffer. Brad is probably lying in a ditch somewhere, hurt." I reached into my leather tote bag. My hand closed around the thick manila envelope that my private investigator Thorne had hand-delivered to me at the airport. It was heavy. It contained the weight of every lie Brad had told for the last 5 years. I didn't hand it to them gently. I tossed it. It landed on Keisha's lap with a heavy thud sliding against her legs. "Read it," I said. Keisha looked at the envelope, then at me. "What is this?" "It is the reason your husband isn't answering his phone," I said. "Open it." Keisha's trembling fingers fumbled with the clasp. She pulled out the stack of papers. The first thing that slid out was the 8x10 glossy photograph of Brad sitting at the poker table in the underground casino. In the harsh flash of the surveillance camera, he didn't look like a tech mogul. He looked like a sweaty, desperate junkie. My mother leaned over, looking at the photo. That doesn't prove anything," she stammered. "He plays cards sometimes. To relax. The stress of the startup was getting to him." "Keep reading," I said. Keisha turned the page. It was a copy of the flight manifest from Friday morning. United Airlines, Chicago to Las Vegas. One way. Passenger Bradley Davidson. He left, Keisha whispered. Her voice was barely audible. He went to Vegas. He didn't just go to Vegas, I corrected her. He went to escape. Look at the bank transfer records on the next page. She flipped the page. It was a printout of the burner account Brad had used, the deposit of $250,000 from the home equity loan, then the withdrawals, $100,000 to a known bookmaker, $50,000 to a jewelry store, the rest withdrawn in cash. He stole it, Keisha said, the tears starting to flow again. He stole the house money. He didn't just steal the money, Keisha. I said, my voice hard. He stole your dignity. Look at the last section, the text logs. Keisha flipped to the back of the file. These were the screenshots Thorne had intercepted. The text between Brad and Sugar. Don't worry, baby. The old man signed the papers. I'll have the cash by Tuesday. Does your wife know? She thinks it's for business. She's clueless. Just be ready. Keisha stared at the words. She read them over and over again. Her mouth opened in a silent scream. The image of the perfect marriage, the wealthy husband, the envy of her friends, it all shattered in her hands. It is a lie, she screamed, throwing the papers onto the hospital floor. You made this up. You photoshopped this because you hate him. You want to ruin my life. I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the mugshot on the bottom of the pile. Bradley Davidson, arrested, 2018. Wire fraud. Identity theft. He is a con artist, Keisha, I said. He has done this to 3 other families. You weren't his wife. You were his mark, and Mom and Dad were the bank. Keisha crumbled. She slid out of the chair and curled into a ball on the dirty linoleum floor, sobbing so loudly that a nurse at the station looked up and frowned. It was a guttural, animalistic sound of pure heartbreak. I looked at my mother, expecting to see anger, expecting to see her finally turn on the man who had destroyed us. I expected her to apologize to me for choosing a criminal over her own daughter. But my mother stared at the mugshot, and then she did something that froze the blood in my veins. She shook her head. No, she said softly. No, this isn't right. The evidence is right there, Mom, I said, pointing at the floor. He stole $250,000. He left Dad to die. He must have been in trouble, my mother said, looking up at me with pleading eyes. You don't understand, Sophia, the pressure he was under. Maybe he owed money to bad people. Maybe he did this to protect us. If he didn't pay them, maybe they would have hurt Keisha. I stared at her. My mouth fell open slightly. Are you serious? I asked. You are defending him. After everything. He has a good heart, my mother insisted, her voice gaining strength. He drove me to church. He mowed the lawn. He called Marcus Dad. A man doesn't do that if he is evil. He probably got caught up in something and panicked. He is just a boy, Sophia. He needs help, not judgment. If we find him, maybe we can explain. Maybe he will give the money back if we just talk to him. I looked at Keisha sobbing on the floor, and my mother clutching the mugshot, like it was a holy relic. They were sick. It wasn't just financial incompetence, it was a sickness of the soul. They were so addicted to the idea of Brad the white savior that they would rather believe he was a victim of circumstance than admit he was a villain who played them for fools. They would rather lose everything than admit I was right. I felt something inside me finally disconnect. The last tether of guilt, the last string of obligation, it snapped. You are insane, I said quietly. You are defending the man who made you homeless while asking the daughter you abused to pay the rent. We aren't homeless, my mother said, standing up and smoothing her shirt. We have the house. We just need to clear up this loan. If you just loan us the money to catch up, we can find Brad and sort this out. I laughed. It was a cold, harsh sound that made my mother flinch. You don't have a house, Mom. And you aren't going to find Brad. But you are right about one thing. This needs to be sorted out. I turned around and walked toward the exit. Where are you going? My mother screamed after me. Sophia, come back here. We are a family. You can't leave us like this. I didn't look back. I didn't stop. I walked out of the hospital and into the cool night air. I took out my phone and dialed my attorney. Execute the purchase, I said into the phone. Buy the foreclosure. I want the deed in my name by tomorrow morning. And draft the eviction notice. I am serving it personally. I hung up the phone. My mother wanted to believe in fairy tales. She wanted to believe that the monster was actually a prince. Well, I was about to show her what a real monster looked like. A monster didn't scream. A monster didn't cry. A monster simply bought the building you were sleeping in and changed the locks. The 48-hour countdown did not begin with a bang, but with the quiet sound of packing tape being ripped off a roll. I was not there when the process server walked up the driveway of the house at 123 Maple Street, but I watched the footage later from the security cloud. He was a nondescript man in a windbreaker doing a job he probably did 20 times a day. He didn't knock. He didn't ring the doorbell. He simply smoothed a bright orange piece of paper onto the front door right at eye level, taped it securely on all four corners, and walked away. That piece of paper was louder than a gunshot. In the suburbs, a foreclosure notice taped to a front door is a scarlet letter. It tells the neighbors everything they need to know without saying a word. It says that the people inside have failed. It says that the manicured lawn and the shiny cars were just costumes. My father had been discharged from the hospital that morning. He was sitting in his recliner, weak and pale, staring at the television that was no longer connected to cable because I had cut the cord days ago. My mother brought him a cup of tea made with bottled water because the tap was still dry. When she went to check the mail, she saw the orange paper. I imagine her scream echoed down the block. By the time I arrived at the house an hour later, the atmosphere was hysterical. I pulled my car into the driveway, right next to the spot where Keisha's Range Rover used to park. I walked past the orange notice. I didn't rip it down. I left it there. It was a necessary part of the lesson. Inside the living room looked like a bunker under siege. Suitcases were open on the floor. Keisha was pacing back and forth, her phone pressed to her ear, her face a mask of panic. My mother was sitting on the sofa holding my father's hand, weeping softly. They looked up when I entered. There was no arrogance left in them. No bougie pretense, just raw terror. Sophia, my mother cried, standing up. Thank God you are here. Did you see the door? Did you see what they put on our door? The neighbors are watching. Mrs. Jenkins is looking through her blinds right now. You have to take it down. I walked over to the mantel and picked up a ceramic figurine, examining it. I can't take it down, Mom, I said calmly. It is a legal notice. Tampering with it is a crime. But it says 48 hours, she sobbed. It says we have to vacate the premises by Friday at noon, or the sheriff will remove us by force. Force, Sophia. They are going to drag your father out of his own house. He just had heart surgery. This will kill him. I looked at my father. He looked defeated. For the first time in his life, he couldn't protect them. He had gambled his castle on a fool's promise, and lost. Where is Brad? I asked, looking at Keisha. Keisha stopped pacing. She looked at her phone, then threw it onto the sofa cushions. He blocked me, she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. He blocked you? Everything she said, her voice breaking. His phone goes straight to voicemail. I tried to message him on Instagram and his profile is gone. I tried WhatsApp. Nothing. I even tried to email him and it bounced back. He erased himself, Sophia. He is gone. She sank onto the floor, burying her face in her hands. I thought he loved me. I thought we were partners. He told me to pack my bags for Vegas. He said we were going to celebrate. He is celebrating. I said, cold, hard facts being the only language I spoke now. He is likely celebrating with sugar right now, spending the cash he got from pawning your jewelry. Keisha wailed, a sound of pure misery. My mother stepped forward, grabbing my arm. Her grip was desperate. Forget Brad, she said. We can deal with him later. Right now, we need to save the house. Sophia, you are the only one who can fix this. You have to pay the bank. I pulled my arm away, gently but firmly. Pay the bank, I repeated. Mom, the loan is $250,000, plus fees, plus penalties. That is not a bill. That is a fortune. But you have it, she pleaded. We know you make good money. You have no children. You have no husband. What are you saving for if not for your family? This is your inheritance, Sophia. This is the house you grew up in. You can't let strangers take it. My father spoke up from his chair, his voice weak and raspy. Sophia, please. I made a mistake. I know I made a mistake. I was foolish. But don't let me die on the street. I am too old to start over. I looked at them. The three people who had defined my worth by my utility. They were asking me to be the ATM one last time. They wanted me to write a check that would wipe out a significant portion of my liquid assets just so they could stay in a house they couldn't afford to maintain. If I paid the bank today, what would happen tomorrow? They would still have no water, no electricity, no income, and they would still have the same entitled mindset thinking that I would always be there to catch them. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and final. What do you mean, no? My mother gasped. I mean, I am not paying off Brad's debt, I said. I am not throwing $250,000 into a black hole. But we will pay you back, Keisha cried, looking up from the floor. I will get a job. Mom and Dad have the pension. We will pay you monthly. You have never paid me back for a cup of coffee, Keisha, I said. You certainly won't pay back a mortgage. My mother's face twisted from begging to anger. So that is it. You are going to let us be homeless. You are going to let the sheriff throw your sick father onto the curb. You are heartless, Sophia. I knew you were cold, but I didn't know you were evil. I am not evil, Mom, I said, walking toward the window and looking out at the street. I am realistic. The bank has already accelerated the foreclosure. The debt has been sold. Sold, my father asked. What does that mean? It means the bank classified the loan as toxic, I explained. When Brad defaulted immediately, and the fraud flags were raised, the bank didn't want to deal with the long court process. They sold the debt note to a private investment firm this morning for a lump sum cash payment. So we don't owe the bank anymore? My mother asked, hope flickering in her eyes. No, I said, turning back to face them. You owe the investor. And private investors are much faster than banks. They don't do payment plans. They don't do grace periods. They want the asset. My mother started to cry again. So it is over. Strangers are coming. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was almost 5 p.m. The business day was closing. The deed transfer was likely being recorded at the county clerk's office right now. The timeline was precise. I walked over to the table where my purse was sitting. I picked it up. You can't stop the foreclosure, I said, my voice low. And I can't stop the bank from enforcing the contract you signed. So you are leaving us, my mother screamed. You are walking out just like Brad. I paused at the door. I looked at the orange notice taped to the wood. I am not walking out, I said. And you don't have to worry about strangers, Mom. What do you mean? She asked, wiping her eyes. I opened the door, and the evening sun flooded into the dark hallway. I said, I can't stop the bank. I said, looking back at them one last time. But I know who bought the debt. Who, my father asked, sitting up straighter. Who bought it? Can we talk to them? Will they give us time? I smiled. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a predator who had finally cornered its prey. Oh, you will definitely be talking to them, I said. In fact, the new owner will be here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. sharp to discuss the terms of your surrender. I suggest you have your bags packed just in case. I walked out to my car, leaving them in a state of confused terror. They were racking their brains trying to figure out which shark had smelled the blood in the water. They didn't realize that the shark had been swimming in their tank for 30 years, waiting for the moment they fell in. The morning sun hit the front porch of 123 Maple Street at exactly 8:59, but inside the house, it felt like midnight in a graveyard. My parents and Keisha were gathered in the living room dressed in their church clothes, sitting on the edge of the sofa like prisoners waiting for the warden. My mother had spent the last 2 hours frantically cleaning, polishing the coffee table, and vacuuming the rug as if a clean house would convince a predatory investor to have mercy. My father sat with his hands resting on his knees, his breathing shallow, terrified that the stress would trigger another heart episode. Keisha was silent for once, her eyes darting toward the window every time a car passed by. They were waiting for the new owner. They were waiting for the shark who had bought their debt to walk through the door and decide their fate. They expected a stranger. They expected a cold corporate suit from a hedge fund, or perhaps a rough-looking developer who wanted to tear the house down. They were terrified because for the first time in their lives, they had no leverage, they had no money, they had no Brad. And they believed they had no daughter. At 9 o'clock sharp, a black town car pulled into the driveway. I watched from the back seat as my driver put the vehicle in park. Beside me sat Mr. Henderson, my corporate attorney. He was a man of few words and expensive suits, the kind of lawyer who could dismantle a company with a single memo. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "Are you ready for this, Ms. Sterling?" he asked. I smoothed the skirt of my black dress. "I have been ready for this since I was 16 years old," I replied. "Let's go." We walked up the driveway together. I didn't look at the flower beds I had planted years ago. I didn't look at the roof I had paid to replace. I looked at the front door, where the orange foreclosure notice was still taped, mocking them. Mr. Henderson reached out and ripped it down, folding it neatly into his briefcase. He rang the doorbell. I heard the shuffling of feet inside. Then the door opened slowly. My mother stood there. When she saw me, her face fell. "Sophia," she said, her voice thick with confusion and disappointment. "What are you doing here? We told you not to come. The new owner is arriving any minute. We don't want a scene." Mr. Henderson stepped forward before I could answer. "Good morning, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice smooth and authoritative. "My name is Arthur Henderson. I am the attorney representing the new title holder of this property." My mother looked from him to me and back again. She blinked rapidly. You are the owner's lawyer," she stammered. "But why is Sophia with you?" "We can discuss the details inside," Mr. Henderson said, stepping past her into the foyer. We walked into the living room. My father struggled to stand up out of respect, but Mr. Henderson gestured for him to sit. Keisha looked at me with a mixture of suspicion and hope. "Who is the owner?" my father asked, his voice trembling. "Is it a bank? Is it a developer? We just want to know if we can negotiate a lease. We have lived here for 30 years. Mr. Henderson placed his briefcase on the coffee table, the same table where Brad had spun his lies about crypto and startups. He clicked the latches open. The sound echoed in the silent room. He pulled out a thick document bound in a blue folder. "The debt note regarding this property was purchased yesterday by a private holding company," Mr. Henderson explained. "The foreclosure process was finalized this morning at the county clerk's office. The deed has been transferred." My mother wrung her hands. "Who is the company?" "Please, sir, we are good people. We were victims of fraud." "The company is Sterling Capital, LLC," Mr. Henderson said. My father frowned. "Sterling. That is a coincidence. That is our last name. It is not a coincidence," I said, speaking for the first time. The room went deadly silent. My mother turned to me slowly. My father froze. Keisha's mouth dropped open. "Sterling Capital is my company," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I formed it 5 years ago to manage my real estate portfolio." My mother whispered. "I bought the debt, Mom," I continued. "I paid off the investor who held the note. I own the mortgage. I own the deed. I own this house." For 5 seconds, nobody breathed. The realization washed over them in waves. First shock, then confusion, and then, predictably, relief. My mother let out a loud sob and collapsed back onto the sofa, clutching her chest. "Oh, thank God," she cried. "Oh, thank Jesus. It is Sophia. Marcus, did you hear that? It is Sophia. She bought the house." My father closed his eyes and let out a long, shuddering breath. "I thought we were done for," he murmured. "I thought it was a stranger." Keisha jumped up and ran over to me, trying to hug me. "I knew it," she squealed. "I knew you wouldn't let us down. I told Mom you were just trying to scare us." "Oh my God, Sophia, you had us so worried. Why did you play this game? You could have just told us you paid it off." I took a step back, avoiding Keisha's embrace. She hugged the air and looked at me confused. My mother was already wiping her tears, smiling now. "Well, the important thing is that it is over. Sophia saved us. We can stay. We just need to get the water turned back on. Sophia, since you are the owner now, you need to call the utility company. And we need to talk about groceries. The fridge is empty." I looked at them. They had pivoted so fast it was dizzying. One minute they were terrified of eviction. The next minute, because they realized the owner was their daughter, they assumed the rules didn't apply. They assumed that ownership meant charity. They assumed that everything would go back to normal, where I paid the bills and they treated me like garbage. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. "I think there is a misunderstanding," he said. My mother looked at him, annoyed now that the fear was gone. "What misunderstanding? My daughter owns the house. It stays in the family. That is how it works." I walked over to the fireplace. I ran my finger along the mantel, checking for dust. "It is not a misunderstanding, Mom," I said, turning to face them. "And it is not staying in the family." My father looked up, his smile fading. "What do you mean, Sophia?" "I mean that Sterling Capital LLC is a business," I said. "It is not a charity. It is not a family reunion fund. I bought this house as an investment, and like any investment, it needs to yield a return." My mother stood up, her hands on her hips. "Sophia, stop talking like a robot. We are your parents. You own the house, so we live here. End of story." "No," I said. "That is not the end of the story. That is the beginning of the eviction." "Eviction!" Keisha screamed. "You can't evict us. We are your blood." I looked at Mr. Henderson. He pulled another document from his briefcase. "These are the standard eviction papers," he said, sliding them across the table toward my father. "Because you are previous owners occupying a foreclosed property, you are technically squatters at this point. However, Ms. Sterling has generously agreed to give you a 72-hour grace period to vacate the premises voluntarily." "Vacate," my father stammered. "But where will we go?" "That is not my concern," I said. "Just like it wasn't your concern when you told me I was always last. Just like it wasn't your concern when you gave my seat at the table to a con artist." My mother's face turned purple. "You are doing this for revenge," she hissed. "You are doing this because you are jealous of Brad. You are doing this to punish us." "I am doing this because you are a liability," I said, cutting her off. "You mortgaged this house to gamble. You lost it. If a stranger bought it, you would be on the street in an hour. I am giving you 3 days. That is more than you deserve. But we have nowhere to go," my mother wailed. I looked at her. I remembered the years of neglect. I remembered the insults. I remembered the hospital waiting room where she defended Brad while I paid the bills. "Then I suggest you find a shelter," I said. "Or maybe you can call Brad. I hear the motels in Vegas are cheap this time of year." "Sophia, please." My father begged, tears running down his face. "I am an old man. This is my home." "It was your home, Dad," I said, feeling a flicker of pain but crushing it instantly. "But you sold it. You sold it for a dream that wasn't real. Now it belongs to me. And I have new plans for this property." I signaled to Mr. Henderson. He stood up and closed his briefcase. "You have 3 days," I said, walking toward the door. "The movers will be here on Friday to clear out whatever you leave behind. Anything left in the house after noon on Friday becomes the property of Sterling Capital." I didn't wait for them to scream. I didn't wait for them to beg. I walked out of the house that had been my prison and into the bright morning sun. Behind me, I heard my mother screaming my name, but I didn't turn around. I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their landlord, and business was closed. Mr. Henderson placed a heavy black fountain pen on the coffee table. The sound of it hitting the polished wood was quieter than a gavel, but it carried the same finality. My parents stared at the pen as if it were a loaded weapon. The document beside it was thick and bound in a blue legal folder titled Voluntary Surrender of Possession and General Release. It was a sterile name for a tragic act. It was the paperwork that would officially turn my parents from homeowners into tenants, and from tenants into memories. The silence in the room was thick with the dust of shattered pride. My father, Marcus, looked at the papers, and then at his hands, the same hands that had worked for 30 years to buy this house, and 10 minutes to lose it. My mother, Linda, sat next to him, her handkerchief twisted into a tight knot, her eyes darting between me and the lawyer, looking for a trap door that didn't exist. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. As the attorney for Sterling Capital LLC, I have prepared this agreement to facilitate a smooth transition, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. It stipulates that Marcus and Linda Sterling agree to vacate the property known as 123 Maple Street within 72 hours. In exchange, Sterling Capital agrees to waive all claims for back rent and legal fees associated with the foreclosure. My father looked up. "Waive the rent," he whispered. "That is correct," Mr. Henderson said. "However, there is an additional addendum added at the specific request of the owner." He turned the page. "Sophia," my mother said, her voice trembling. "What is this?" I stepped forward. I didn't sit down. I wanted to tower over the negotiation because for my entire life they had towered over me. "The addendum concerns the $45,000 I paid to St. Luke's Hospital," I said. My mother's eyes widened. You? You want that back?" "Sophia, we don't have it. You know we don't have it." "I know," I said calmly. "And because I know you cannot pay me back, I am offering you a trade." "A trade?" my father asked. "I will forgive the $45,000 debt," I said. "I will not sue you for reimbursement. I will write it off as a loss. In addition, I have secured a lease on a rental property in your names. I have paid the deposit and the first 6 months of rent." My mother let out a gasp of relief. "Oh, Sophia, I knew it. I knew you wouldn't leave us on the street." She reached out as if to touch my hand, but I pulled back. "Let me finish, Mom. The apartment is a one-bedroom unit in the Oakwood complex on the south side. It is clean, it is safe, and it is paid for through the winter." "A one-bedroom," my mother repeated, her smile fading. But there are 3 of us. Where will Keisha sleep?" I looked at Keisha. She was sitting on the arm of the sofa looking at me with wide, expectant eyes. She assumed that the package deal included her. She assumed that because she was the golden child, the rules of physics and finance would bend to accommodate her. "Keisha," I said, my voice dropping an octave, "this offer is for Mom and Dad." Keisha blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean the apartment has 1 bedroom. It is for 2 people. Elderly people with medical needs. You are 29 years old. You are able-bodied. And you have a husband." Keisha stood up, her face flushing red. "Brad is gone. You know he is gone." "How can you say that? You expect me to live on the street while they get an apartment. I expect you to figure it out," I said coldly. "Just like I figured it out when I was 18 and left this house. Just like I figured it out when I put myself through college. You have a degree, Keisha. You have legs. Go get a job. You can't separate us," she screamed. "We are a family. Mom, tell her I am coming with you." My mother looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Sophia, please. She is your sister. She can sleep on the couch. The apartment must have a living room." "The lease specifies maximum occupancy of 2 adults," I lied. It was a standard clause, but I was enforcing it with the weight of law. "If Keisha moves in, you will be in violation of the lease, and you will be evicted from there too. Do you want to take that risk, Mom?" Do you want to risk Dad's recovery for Keisha's comfort? My mother froze. She looked at Keisha, then at my father, who was looking at the floor ashamed. You are a monster, Keisha spat at me. You are doing this on purpose. You want to see me suffer. You are jealous because I was always the favorite. I smiled. It was a razor-sharp expression. I am not jealous, Keisha. I am indifferent. You wanted the bougie lifestyle. You wanted the high-roller husband. Well, welcome to the other side of the gamble. This is what happens when you bet on an illusion. I turned back to my father. This is the deal, Dad. You sign the papers surrendering the house and agreeing to vacate by Friday at noon. In return, you get the debt forgiveness and the keys to the apartment. If you don't sign, I will have the sheriff here in an hour to remove you by force. I will sue you for the $45,000 and I will garnish your pension checks until the day you die. My father flinched as if I had struck him. He looked at the pen. Sophia, he whispered, tears leaking from his eyes. How did you become this hard? We raised you. You didn't raise me, I said, my voice shaking slightly for the first time. You tolerated me. You raised Keisha. I raised myself. And this hard shell you see, you built it. Every time you put me last, you added a layer of armor. Now you are dealing with the finished product. I pointed to the dotted line. Sign the papers. My father reached out with a trembling hand. He picked up the heavy black pen. It looked unnatural in his fingers, which were used to factory tools and remote controls. He hovered the tip over the paper. Marcus, wait, my mother cried, grabbing his arm. We can't give up the house. It is our legacy. It is gone. Linda, my father said, his voice cracking. It is already gone. Brad took it. Sophia is just burying the body. He shook her hand off. He pressed the pen to the paper. The scratching sound of the nib against the page was loud in the silent room. Marcus Sterling. He pushed the paper to my mother. Your turn, Linda, he said, staring at the wall. My mother wept openly now. She picked up the pen as if it were burning her skin. She looked at me one last time, hoping for a reprieve, hoping for the daughter who used to draw her pictures and bake her cookies. But that daughter was gone. She signed, Linda Sterling. Mr. Henderson reached forward and took the document. He checked the signatures, then stamped it with a notary seal. Ka-chunk. The sound of a cell door closing. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single silver key on a plain wire ring. He placed it on the table. This is the key to Unit 4B at the Oakwood Complex, he said. The movers will be here Friday at 8 a.m. Be ready. Keisha stared at the key. She realized in that moment that there was no key for her. She was truly alone. Cheating due bome radunga, she whispered in English, her voice breaking into a mix of fury and despair. You are actually kicking us out. I picked up my purse. I am not kicking them out, I said. I am moving them on. As for you, Keisha, I heard the mall is hiring for the holiday season. Maybe you can get a discount on a real handbag. I turned and walked to the door, Mr. Henderson following close behind. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't say I love you. Those words belonged to a family that existed. This was just a business transaction concluded successfully. As I stepped onto the porch, I heard the wail of my mother and the screaming of my sister. But for the first time in my life, the noise was behind me. I walked to the town car, got in, and told the driver to take me to the finest steakhouse in the city. I had a victory dinner to eat, alone, and it was going to taste delicious. Friday morning arrived with a sky the color of bruised slate matching the mood inside the house on Maple Street. The 72-hour deadline was up. My parents had spent the night packing their lives into cardboard boxes, their movements slow and heavy like people walking underwater. The house that had once been filled with noise and arrogance was now echoing with the sound of packing tape and quiet sobbing. I stood in the kitchen leaning against the granite island, drinking black coffee and watching them. I wasn't there to help. I was there to supervise the asset transfer. I needed to ensure that the property of Sterling Capital was not damaged during their exit. The movers I had hired for them were scheduled to arrive at noon, but at 10 o'clock, a different kind of visitor arrived. The back door, which had a faulty lock that my father had been meaning to fix for 5 years, creaked open. I heard footsteps. They were not the heavy steps of a mover. They were the frantic, skittering steps of a rat. I walked silently into the hallway and stood in the shadows. My parents were upstairs in the master bedroom packing clothes. Keisha was in the living room sitting on a pile of boxes staring blankly at the wall. None of them heard the intruder. Brad slipped into the hallway. He looked terrible. His expensive suit was wrinkled and stained. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had a scruffy, desperate beard. He didn't call out for his wife. He didn't look for his in-laws. He moved with a singular, predatory focus toward the dining room cabinet where my mother kept her grandmother's antique silverware and her jewelry box. He wasn't back to save them. He was back to pick the carcass clean. I watched as he grabbed the mahogany jewelry box. He fumbled with the latch, his hands shaking. He dumped the contents into his pockets. My mother's pearls. Her diamond engagement ring, which she had taken off to clean. The gold bracelet I had bought her for her 50th birthday. He turned to leave, hugging his pockets, but he froze when he saw me blocking the hallway. "Going somewhere, Brad?" I asked, my voice cutting through the silence like a knife. He jumped, nearly dropping a silver candlestick he had shoved under his arm. "Sophia," he breathed, his eyes darting around, looking for an exit. I was just picking up some things for Keisha. We need assets. I have a plan to fix everything." "You are stealing my mother's jewelry," I said. "It is family property." He spat, his facade of charm completely gone. "I am the head of this family. I decide what we do with it. Now get out of my way." He took a step toward me, thinking he could intimidate me. He thought I was still the quiet girl in the corner. He didn't know he was walking toward a loaded gun. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," I said calmly, checking my watch. "The police are already in the driveway." Brad froze. "What?" "I called them 10 minutes ago," I said. "I saw you park your car down the street on the security camera. I knew you would come back. A parasite always comes back for one last meal." Before he could run, the front door burst open. 2 uniformed officers stepped in, their hands on their holsters. I had told the dispatch that an intruder was burglarizing my property, and given the neighborhood, they responded with impressive speed. "Police department hands where I can see them," the officer shouted. Brad panicked. He tried to bolt toward the back door, but the second officer was faster. He tackled Brad to the hardwood floor. The jewelry box contents spilled out of his pockets, scattering diamonds and gold across the floorboards. My parents ran down the stairs screaming. Keisha rushed in from the living room. "Brad," she screamed. "Oh my God, what are you doing to him?" "Ma'am, step back," the officer ordered, pulling Brad's arms behind his back. My mother stared at the scattered jewelry. He was taking my rings," she whispered. Brad looked up from the floor, his face pressed against the wood. He looked at Keisha, and his eyes were filled with pure venom. "Shut up, you idiot!" he yelled at her. "This is your fault. If you hadn't been so high maintenance, I wouldn't be in this mess. I needed the money to pay Vinny. You and your family are nothing but a burden." Keisha recoiled as if he had slapped her. The man she worshipped, the man she had thrown me away for, was lying in handcuffs, blaming her for his crimes. The illusion didn't just crack, it shattered into a million jagged pieces. The officers hauled Brad to his feet. "Ms. Sterling," one officer said, looking at me. "Is this the man?" "Yes," I said. "That is Bradley Davidson. He is trespassing on my property and stealing assets belonging to the estate. I want to press full charges." Brad stared at me. "Your property," he snarled. "This is Marcus's house." "Not anymore," I said, stepping closer to him. "I bought it yesterday, Brad. You are robbing me. And I have a very good lawyer. Enjoy prison." As they dragged him out the front door, kicking and screaming obscenities, Keisha sank to the floor amidst the scattered pearls. She didn't cry. She just stared at the empty space where her husband had been. She was finally seeing the reality I had lived in for years. My parents didn't say a word. The shame on my father's face was a physical weight. He picked up the jewelry, slowly putting it back into the box. He realized that the only reason he still had these heirlooms was because I had been watching. The movers arrived at noon. The exit was swift and silent. My parents loaded their few allotted boxes into the van. They looked small, they looked old. They walked out of the house they had lived in for 30 years, carrying only their clothes and the bitter taste of regret. I handed my father the key to the apartment. "The address is on the tag," I said. "The utilities are on. Don't lose it." "Thank you, Sophia," he whispered. He tried to meet my eyes, but he couldn't. My mother lingered at the door, looking back at the living room. She looked at me, wanting to say something, wanting to bridge the gap. But the gap was a canyon now. She turned and walked to the waiting taxi. Keisha was the last to leave. She stood on the porch with her suitcases of fake designer bags. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice hollow. "I don't know, Keisha," I said. "But you can't stay here." She looked at me with hate, but it was a weak, toothless hate. "You won," she said. "Are you happy?" I looked past her at the empty street where the police car had taken Brad away. "I am not happy," I said. "I am solvent. There is a difference. Goodbye, Keisha." She dragged her bags down the driveway. I watched her walk until she turned the corner toward the bus stop. I went back inside. The house was empty. The silence was absolute. I walked through the rooms. I walked into the dining room where I used to sit in the corner. I walked into the kitchen where they had demanded my money. It didn't feel like home. It felt like a building with good bones and bad memories. A knock at the door startled me. It was the locksmith I had scheduled. "Ms. Sterling?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "You wanted the locks changed." "All of them," I said. "Front, back, and garage. I want high-security deadbolts. Nothing from the old keys should work." I stood in the foyer watching him work. He drilled out the old cores, the metal shavings falling onto the floor like gold dust. He replaced the mechanisms that my father had installed. He handed me a shiny new set of keys. "You are all set, ma'am." I locked the door behind him. I was alone. Truly alone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel lonely. I felt secure. My phone rang. The screen lit up in the dim hallway. Keisha. I stared at it. I could let it go to voicemail. I could block her. But I decided to answer one last time. "Hello." Sophia. Keisha's voice was frantic, trembling with cold and fear. "I am at the bus station. I don't have enough cash for a motel. It is starting to rain. Mom and Dad said I can't stay at the apartment because of the lease. Please, I just need one night. I will pay you back, I promise." I walked to the window. I watched the rain beginning to fall on the lawn I now owned. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner. I thought about the plastic chair. I thought about my father saying, "You are always last." "It is raining hard," Keisha cried. "I have nowhere to go." I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of fresh paint and freedom. "Good to know," I said. I pressed the red button. I didn't block the number. I wanted to see the calls come in and know that I didn't have to answer them. I turned off the lights, leaving the house in darkness, and walked out the back door to my car. I had a reservation at a steakhouse, and I wasn't going to be late. The wine would be expensive, the steak would be rare, and the bill would be mine alone to pay. And that was the sweetest victory of all. This story teaches a powerful truth: you cannot buy respect from people who are committed to misunderstanding you. For years, I believed that if I gave enough, I would finally be enough. But I learned that toxic loyalty is just self-sabotage wrapped in tradition. True freedom isn't about revenge. It's about removing your access from those who abuse it. You are not obligated to set yourself on fire to keep ungrateful people warm. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people face the consequences of their own choices and build a life that is authentically yours. If you've ever had to choose your peace over your family's expectations, hit that like button and subscribe to join our community of survivors, winning on their own terms.